You ever heard of a place where silence isn't peace, but a warning? The Priory of Sion. Once a beacon of learning, now a whisper in the dark. You know, just outside of France, in the hills where the mist clings like a shroud. It was built in the 12th century, you see, by a noble family who believed in the sacred power of knowledge. But something happened. A fire, a scandal, or maybe the secrets they protected just got too heavy. Now, it's a ruin. A place where the wind carries voices you can't quite place, and the stones seem to remember the weight of time. Some say the silence here is too loud to ignore. But what really haunts the Priory of Sion isn't just its past. It's the stories that linger, the ones about the lost books, the secret societies, and the people who vanished without a trace. You ever wonder what secrets a place like this might still be holding? And so, we begin our journey into the silence, not just of the Priory, but of the stories that refuse to be forgotten. You ready to listen? Or are you afraid the silence will speak first? You've heard of the Knights Templar, but the Priory of Sion? That's a name that lingers like a whisper in the dark. It started in the 12th century, but its true story is buried deeper than any grave. The Priory was more than just a place, it was a secret society. They called themselves the Keepers of the Light, but what they really kept was knowledge that the church wanted buried. Some say they were protectors of ancient wisdom, others claim they were frauds with secrets. But one thing is clear, those who knew too much didn't live to tell the tale. The Priory was destroyed in the 14th century, but its legacy lives on. Some believe its secrets were hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right eyes to see them. You remember how things were, don't you? The Priory was a place of quiet devotion, where the scent of incense clung to the air like a promise. But then, something shifted, like the wind in a still room, subtle but unmistakable. The first sign was the silence. Not the kind that comes with stillness, but the kind that presses down like a weight. It wasn't the absence of sound, it was the presence of something that refused to be heard. Then came the whispers, not voices, but the feeling of being watched. Not from behind, but from everywhere at once. A presence that didn't belong, yet had always been there. One morning, the monks found the library door ajar. Not a crack, but fully open, as if it had been pushed from the inside. And the books were gone. Just gone. Left behind only the scent of old paper and something else, something that clung to the air like a warning. It was then that the first real fear took root. Not for the monks, but for the ones who had come to listen. Because silence, once broken, is never the same again. And the Priory had something to say, and it wasn't ready to be heard. You've heard the whispers of the Priory of Sion, but what about the night they vanished? It was a cold autumn evening, and the wind howled like a grieving mother through the stone corridors. The last known sighting of the group was in the great hall, where they gathered for a final meeting. They were meant to share secrets, but instead, they vanished into the night like smoke. The only clue left behind was a single locket, found days later near the old well. Inside, a faded portrait of a young woman, her eyes wide with fear, and a note that read, "They are not gone." To this day, the Priory remains a place of silence, its secrets buried beneath centuries of dust and dread. But sometimes, in the quietest moments, you can still hear them whispering. If you ever find yourself near the Priory, listen closely. The silence there isn't empty, it's full of voices, waiting for someone to hear them. I once spoke with a woman who claims to have seen the Priory's ghostly figure, a man in a 16th century robe, standing at the window, staring into the woods. She said it wasn't a trick of the light, but a presence that made her feel watched. Another claimed to hear the sound of a child's laughter echoing through the halls at night, only to find the house empty, the windows sealed, and no one around. The laughter would stop when she tried to call out. There's one story I've heard more than any other, a man who claimed to have been invited to the Priory for a quiet evening of wine and conversation. He said he never left, and that the house had a way of making you stay. He described the house as if it had its own will, pressing on his shoulders, whispering in a language he couldn't understand. He said the walls were alive, and the silence was louder than any sound. When he finally left, he said the Priory had given him something he couldn't explain, memories of people who had never been there, and a feeling that he was being watched even now. We began with the old ledgers, brittle with age, their pages whispering secrets in the stillness. The entries were sparse, but something about the dates, the names, there was a pattern, a rhythm, like a heartbeat in the silence. Then came the letters, sealed with wax and written in a hand that seemed to tremble. They spoke of meetings in the woods, of a secret chamber beneath the Priory, and of a name that had been erased from the records, Lysenra. The more we dug, the more the silence around us seemed to hum with something unseen. We found a map, drawn in charcoal, with a cross marking a spot deep in the forest, and a symbol that looked like an eye, watching. Then came the photographs, old, grainy images of the Priory in its prime, and in one, a shadowed figure standing at the edge of the courtyard, just out of focus, as if waiting. And finally, the diary written in a trembling hand, filled with fear and desperation. It described a ritual, a sacrifice, and a promise. When the silence breaks, the truth will rise from the dust. You've followed every thread, every whisper of the Priory's past. But there's one thing that has never been explained. One detail that lingers like the ghost of a forgotten name. It's not a lack of evidence, not a missing body, not even a lost heir. It's something more elusive. A gap in the story that refuses to close, like a door left slightly ajar in the middle of the night. The Priory's records say nothing about this place. No name, no date, no reason. It's as if the history itself has forgotten it or chose to leave it behind. And yet, the air around it feels different. Like the silence isn't just broken, it's held hostage. Like something is waiting, just beyond the reach of memory and time. So now you ask yourself, what was this place? And why did the Priory choose to forget it? The answer might be buried in the silence, waiting for the right hand to turn the page. You've heard the tales of the Priory's secrets, but what about the stories that linger in the bones of the town? The locals say the wind carries the voices of the lost, and that the old stones remember. Some say the Priory was cursed by the blood of its last abbess, and that every storm brings the sound of her weeping in the wind. Others whisper that the walls still hum with the memory of a love that was never meant to be. There are those who claim the Priory is still a place of power, where the veil between worlds is thinnest. But not everyone who goes there returns or remembers what they saw. And then there are the quietest stories, the ones that are never told aloud. The ones that only the elders know, passed down like a secret recipe, each generation adding a new layer of fear. So, what do you think? Is the Priory just a place, or is it something more? Something that waits, in the silence, for the next curious soul to listen. You know, sometimes the silence is louder than the screams. The Priory of Sion is one of those places where the truth just fades, but the echoes remain. There were whispers of a secret buried beneath the floors, a code hidden in the walls. But the only thing that ever came out was more questions and fewer answers. Some say the silence is because the truth was never meant to be found. Others say it's because the people who knew still haven't spoken. But who can we trust anymore? The story is still being written, and the last page is still blank. But I wonder if the silence is a warning. What are we meant to hear? As the last echoes of the Priory fade, I wonder what secrets still linger in the silence. What ghosts, unseen, are listening to our stories. We've traveled far through time and shadow, but there's always more to uncover. And sometimes, the most chilling stories are the ones that never quite end. And if you ever find yourself in a place that feels still, don't be surprised if it speaks to you. Sometimes, the silence is the loudest sound of all. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have another tale to share, one that may not be as quiet, but it will certainly be unforgettable. You've heard of places that hold secrets, but St. Remy? That's a place that holds souls a former asylum on the edge of a French village, where the walls don't just echo they whisper . Built in the 1800s, this place was once a haven for the mad. But the real horror, the patients weren't the only ones suffering. Some say the walls remember every scream, every plea, every silent prayer. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Now it's a museum, but the stories don't stop. Staff say the wind carries voices, some say they're the patients, others say it's something older . The place is alive, and it's not done with us yet. There are no ghosts here that you can see, but you feel them. The air is thick with the weight of time, and the silence is louder than any scream. You can almost hear the walls say, you're not alone. And that's just the beginning. We're not here to scare you, just to tell you what you might hear if you ever find yourself standing in the silence of St. Remy. But be warned, once you hear the whispers, you'll never forget them. You've heard the name St. Remy, but do you know where it began? It started in the 16th century, when a nobleman named Pierre de Montreuil sought to build a refuge for the lost and the broken. The land was wild, thick with pine and bramble, and the air carried the scent of damp earth and something older, something unseen. Pierre's vision was grand, but the monks who helped him saw something more. They believed this place was cursed, that the land itself had been marked by blood and forgotten sins. And so, they built not just an asylum, but a tomb for the souls who had been buried in silence. The first recorded ghost was a woman with a silver shawl and a lullaby. She was said to appear in the night, her voice a soft hum that would wake the patients from their dreams. Some claimed she was a nun who had once tended to the sick, but had been driven mad by the weight of her own guilt. By the 19th century, St. Remy had become a place of both infamy and reverence. It was here that Van Gogh spent his final years, and it was here that the stories of the lost began to multiply. The walls, you see, don't forget. They remember every story, every whisper, every prayer that has ever been said in their silence. So now, as you sit here, wrapped in your blanket and clutching your mug, think about this place. What do you think the walls remember? What did they whisper to you, just out of earshot? You remember the way the walls used to hum, like a low, steady lullaby. It was nothing unusual at first, just a soft murmur, like the wind through the trees. But then, it started to change. The nurses began to notice it too. They said the sound would rise and fall with the seasons, like the heartbeat of the building itself. But it wasn't just a sound, it was a presence. The walls would vibrate when the wind changed direction, like the building itself was breathing. It wasn't the kind of sound that could be ignored, it was the kind that made you feel watched. And then came the first real sign. A nurse found a small, handwritten note tucked in the crevice of the wall. It read, "They are here. They are waiting." No signature, just that one line. We all knew then that something had shifted. The walls were no longer just a part of the asylum, they were a part of its soul. And that soul had been waiting for someone to listen. You know, sometimes the worst crimes are the ones that leave no bodies. And in St. Remy, the silence was louder than any scream. The staff found her things, all neatly packed, as if she'd just left. But there was no one else in the building, no one at all. Just the echo of her absence. The nurses said she'd been acting strangely for weeks, staring at the walls, whispering to herself, her eyes distant, like she was listening to something only she could hear. They found the note in her room, written in her own hand. It read, "I can't stay. They're here. I must go." But to where, or to what, no one could say. And so, St. Remy became a place of questions, not answers. A place where the walls still whisper, and the silence is louder than any explanation. I've spoken to several former patients and staff who say the walls still remember. One nurse, Margaret, swore she heard a child's voice calling her name at 3 a.m. only to find the room empty and no one there. Another visitor described a cold wind blowing through the halls, even though the windows were sealed. It was so strong it knocked over a vase, leaving a trail of shattered glass in the morning light. One man who visited the asylum years ago said he saw a figure in the attic. It was a woman in a 19th century dress, her face pale and her eyes full of sorrow, as if she were pleading for someone to remember her. And then there are the dreams. Some say they wake up with the same dream of being chased through the halls, or of hearing a child's laughter echoing from a room they never entered. These stories aren't just myths, they're echoes from the past, lingering in the walls like the ghosts of those who once called this place home. We began by combing through old records, and what we found was more than we expected. The asylum had a long history of mysterious deaths, many unexplained, and some that just didn't fit the official story. One entry caught our eye, a patient who vanished without a trace in 1932. No body was ever found, and the official report was just a vague mention of disappearance under circumstances unknown. One of the nurses from the time told us a story about a room that never warmed up, no matter the season. She said the walls would hum at night, and that the patient who vanished was often heard whispering to the walls. We even found a series of anonymous letters, written in the same hand, all describing the same thing: a presence in room 13, a voice that spoke in riddles, and a patient who never left. It was clear that something was being hidden, and the deeper we dug, the more we felt that we weren't just uncovering a mystery, we were being watched. You ever wonder what happens when a place stops whispering? St. Remy's walls used to hum with secrets, but now they're silent. And that silence? It's the one thing that has never been explained. No one can say for sure what stopped the whispers. Some say the walls grew tired. Others insist the voices were never real to begin with. But the silence remains, like a wound that won't close. You can walk those halls now, but the walls won't tell you what they once did. They just stand there, quiet and watchful, like they're waiting for someone to ask the right question. And that's the real mystery, isn't it? Not the ghosts, not the stories, but the silence. The one thing that has never been explained. Some say the walls remember. Others whisper that the garden still holds their secrets. What do you think the trees know that we don't? In the village, they tell of the night the stars blinked out. Some say it was the ghosts of the lost, trying to find their way back to the earth. There's talk of a hidden chamber beneath the chapel, where the echoes of laughter still linger. Have you ever heard the laughter in the silence? The local priest insists the asylum never truly closed. He says he's seen the light flicker in the windows at dawn, like a soul trying to leave. And then there's the legend of the girl who never left. Some say she's still waiting for her brother to come back, and the walls won't let her go. You ever wonder what happens to the stories that never find closure? The ones that drift like ghosts through time, lingering in the corners of our minds, waiting for someone to listen. St. Remy's whispers have been silenced for decades, but the questions remain: did the patients truly vanish, or did they simply become part of the walls? No bodies were ever found. No records were ever fully explained, just a silence that echoes louder than any scream. Perhaps the real mystery isn't what happened here, but why we still feel the need to return, to hear the whispers, to imagine the truth waiting just beyond the next wall. And maybe, just maybe, the walls are still listening, waiting for someone to ask the right question and to finally hear the answer. You can almost hear the silence between the whispers, like the walls are holding their breath, waiting for the right moment to speak again. Some say the asylum still listens for those who linger too long, or those who dare to question the stories that were never meant to be told. But remember, my dear, sometimes the most terrifying things are the ones that never speak at all. So, if you're feeling a little chill, don't worry, I've got another tale that's just as warm and just as spooky. You've heard the whispers, haven't you? That one place in the city where the air feels heavy, like it's holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. It's the kind of place where people say things vanish, noises, people, even the sound of their own footsteps. Some say it's a place where the walls remember. Others say it's just the echo of a tragedy that never left. But here's the thing, no one knows what happened there. That's what makes it so unsettling. So, what do you think? Was it a murder? A suicide? Or something else entirely? Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Either way, the room is still waiting for something or someone. You ever wonder how a place like Room 341 even got its name? Well, it wasn't always a hotel. Back in the 1950s, this building was a psychiatric ward, part of a state hospital that treated the mentally ill with methods we'd find barbaric today. They called it the silent ward because patients were kept in silence, isolated from one another, and sometimes from the world entirely. The doctors believed that by cutting off stimulation, they could reset the mind. One day, she disappeared. The nurses said she'd been moved, but no one remembered why. Her notes stopped, and her room was left untouched, as if she'd never been there at all. Years later, when the hospital closed, the building was converted into a luxury hotel. But the rumors followed. Room 341 became a favorite among guests who claimed they heard whispers in the hall or saw a shadowy figure at the door. Some say Clara's spirit is still there, trapped between the silence of the past and the noise of the present. Others say the real tragedy is that her story was never told and that it never will be. You remember the way the halls echoed, like they had a voice of their own. The first thing you noticed was the silence so thick, it felt like it was holding its breath. Then came the faintest hum, like a radio left on, but it wasn't in any room. It was coming from the walls, from the air itself, like the building was trying to tell you something. The next day, the janitor found a single red crayon mark on the wall. Just a little heart, but it was enough to make your skin crawl, like someone had been there just moments before. Then the lights started to fail. One by one, they blinked out, like the building was turning off its own soul. You could feel it, like the place was trying to disappear. By the end of the week, the only thing left was the smell of burnt paper and the feeling that someone or something was still inside, waiting for you to go back. You remember the moment the lights went out, didn't you? The silence that followed wasn't just empty, it felt like the room itself was holding its breath. Then came the sound, low and steady, like someone dragging a chair across the floor, but no one was there. It was as if the room had a heartbeat of its own. The next morning, the room was empty. The bed was made, the clothes neatly folded, but the journal was missing, and the last guest had vanished without a trace. They found the tapes later old, dusty, and full of whispers, not of voices, but of something trying to speak through the static, as if it had been waiting to be heard. And now, every time someone checks the room, they hear it again. A voice, low and pleading, repeating the same thing over and over. "Let me out." I spoke to a former nurse who worked the night shift in that building. She said the room was always locked and the key never fit. She told me it was like the door was waiting for something or someone. One night, she heard a child's laughter echoing from inside. It wasn't the kind of laughter that's fun, it was hollow, like it was coming from behind a wall. She said it made her want to scream, but she couldn't. Another janitor claimed he saw a shadow move in that room every midnight. He said it was tall, always standing in the same spot, never moving. He said it was like it was waiting for the light to go out. He tried to investigate, but every time he approached, the door would lock itself. He said he could feel eyes on him, but when he turned, there was nothing. Just silence. And the sound of a child crying. A few years later, the building was abandoned. The last tenants left in a hurry, their things still half packed. They said they heard voices, but no one would say what they were saying. They never said what they heard, but they all agreed on one thing: room 341 was never empty, and it wasn't waiting for anyone. It was waiting for something to come back. We started with the basics: phone records, security footage, and the hotel's own dusty files. It turned out room 341 had a history of strange complaints, like whispers in the halls and doors slamming shut on their own. One of the maintenance workers remembered a guest who'd stayed there for weeks, never leaving the room. He'd say he was waiting for someone, and when asked who, he'd just shrug and say, "They're coming." We found a voicemail from a guest who had called the front desk 3 days before the incident. He said, "I'm not alone in here. I've been waiting for someone to come back. I can hear them. I can hear them knocking." And then there was the tape, a hidden recording, found behind a wall in the closet with a voice that wasn't the guest's. It was a woman, calm and saying, "I know you're here. I've been waiting too." We never found the source of the tape, or the woman's voice, or the guest who had called. All we had were questions and a room that still felt like it was holding its breath. You know, the thing that's always bugged me is that no one ever found the tape, not a single scrap of it. Just silence, like the room swallowed it whole. They say the tape was recorded on a cheap camcorder, but even the machine was never found. It's like the room had a will of its own, and it didn't want to let go. They checked every corner, every drawer, every wall. Nothing. Just the echo of a voice that never got to finish its last word. And that's the one thing that haunts me more than the whispers in the walls: the fact that the room knew exactly what it had to protect, and it never let it go. You heard the whispers, haven't you? That room 341 isn't just a room, it's a memory. Some say it's the last place a woman was seen alive. Others claim it's where a scream was never heard. The local legends say she was a nurse, a mother, a woman who vanished without a trace. Some say she was kidnapped. Others say she left of her own accord. But no one knows for sure. There are theories, of course. Some say it's a cover-up, that the woman was never missing at all, just a ghost in a hospital bed, trapped between life and death. Others believe it's a warning. That room 341 is not just a place, it's a message. A reminder that some secrets don't stay buried, and some voices refuse to be silenced. And if you're ever curious to find out the truth, you might want to check the tape recorder in the basement. It's still running, and it's been for decades. You know, sometimes the most haunting things aren't the screams or the shadows, but the silence that follows. Room 341 still waits, holding its breath, like it's holding on to something it can't quite let go of. They say the tape recorder was found in the corner, still on, but no one ever heard it play. Was it a trick of the mind, or did the voice inside it finally find its way out of the walls? The police closed the case, but the staff at the hotel still talk about it. They say the room feels colder than the rest of the building, and that the lights flicker when no one's around. And now, decades later, the room still stands, untouched, unopened, as if it's holding on to the last whisper of a voice that never got to say goodbye. So, if you're ever in the mood for a story that lingers long after the lights go out, I'd say room 341 is the kind of place that's worth a visit if you're brave enough. You know, sometimes the most haunting stories aren't the ones that scream, but the ones that whisper. Like room 341, quiet, like a sigh in the night. And sometimes, the silence is louder than any sound, like a ghost in the corner of your eye, waiting for you to look. So, take a moment. Let the silence settle. Maybe, just maybe, you'll hear something in the stillness. But don't worry, dear listener. The next tale is just a whisper away, and it's going to be quite the ride. You ever heard of a place where the past won't let go? It's called the Priory of Sion, nestled in the hills of France, where the silence is so thick, it feels like the air itself is holding its breath. It's said to have been built in the 12th century, but the real mystery starts when you hear the whispers low, almost imperceptible, like the wind carrying secrets from a time long buried. Now, every so often, people say they hear a voice soft, like a sigh calling from the silence. It's not the wind. It's not the stones. It's something else entirely. And if you dare to step inside, you might just find that the past isn't done with you yet. It's waiting. It's watching. And it's not finished telling its story. You know, the Priory of Sion didn't start as a place of mystery and whispers. It began as a quiet, humble refuge in the 12th century, tucked away in the French countryside. A group of monks, weary from war and famine, gathered there to find peace. They called it a priory, but it was more than just a place of worship. It was a sanctuary for those who had lost everything: orphans, widows, and even the injured soldiers returning from the Crusades. A place where kindness and faith were more valuable than gold. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. They were not just monks. They were protectors of knowledge, guardians of truth, and, in time, the target of those who feared what they knew. Their work became a quiet rebellion against the ignorance and tyranny of the age. And so, the Priory of Sion became more than a place. It became a symbol of resistance, a hidden hand shaping the course of history from the shadows, a legacy that would outlive the monks themselves and live on in the whispers of the wind through its crumbling stone walls. You remember the way the air smelled that morning, like damp stone and the faintest trace of lavender from the old cloister. The sun had barely risen, but the silence was thick enough to cut with a knife. The monks had all gone to mass, but the chapel doors stood ajar, as though the air inside had refused to be closed again. You could hear the echo of their voices, but not their footsteps. The garden, once bursting with roses, had grown quiet. Not the stillness of a summer's end, but the hush of something waiting. The scent of rosemary lingered in the air, though no one had placed a single sprig. And then, just as the sun climbed higher, the wind changed. It didn't just move the leaves, it moved the air itself. You could feel it, like a breath from the past, trying to whisper through the cracks in the stone. You ever wonder what happens when a secret too big to keep begins to unravel? The Priory of Sion wasn't just a place, it was a prison for truths that would shake the world. In the 16th century, whispers of an ancient bloodline and hidden knowledge began to surface. But with every secret uncovered, more disappeared men, women, even children vanishing like mist in the morning light. They say he was taken by the order itself, or that he was silenced by the knowledge he uncovered. But what if the truth is even darker? That the Priory was not just hiding history, it was creating it. And now, more than 500 years later, the echoes of his final warning still linger. The bloodline may be ancient, but the secrets it guards are still alive in the shadows. I spoke to an old woman from Provence who said she saw a ghostly figure in the gardens of the Priory, wearing a white robe and carrying a lantern. She swore the light was too bright, too steady, for this time of night. She said the figure moved like someone who knew the place well, but never looked directly at her. It vanished when she tried to call out, leaving only the scent of lavender and something colder in the air. Another man from the region told me about a child's laughter echoing through the stone corridors at midnight. He said it was too clear, too close, and never stopped until the dawn. He said he followed it for miles, only to find himself back at the Priory gates where the laughter faded into the wind like a forgotten memory. Some say the Priory remembers, that the stones hold more than just history, that they hold the weight of those who once lived and those who never left. We followed the trail of whispers through crumbling archives and dusty ledgers. The more we dug, the more the past seemed to whisper back, just out of reach. One evening, as we pored over a ledger from the 1500s, the pages fluttered on their own, as though some unseen hand had turned them. The deeper we went, the more the records hinted at a hidden chamber beneath the Priory, sealed for centuries, its purpose lost to time. We found blueprints that didn't match any known structure, and notes scrawled in a hand that seemed too precise to be a mere monk's. And then, in the silence of the archive, we heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping like fingers on stone echoing from the sealed chamber below. You know, there's one detail that has never been explained. A single thread, so fine it's almost invisible, but it's been tying together every whisper and rumor about the Priory of Sion for centuries. It's not the name, not the location, not even the supposed secret society. It's something far more elusive, something that's never been pinned down, never been confirmed, and yet it haunts every story like a ghost in the attic. Some say it's a name, others say it's a date. Some say it's a location, others say it's a person. But no one can say for sure. It's like the shadow of memory that just slips away before you can grasp it. And that's why we keep coming back to it. Because it's not just a detail. It's a question that hasn't been answered. A mystery that lingers, like the echo of a voice in an empty room. You've heard the names, but what do they really mean? The Priory of Sion, what if it's not a place, but a story passed down like a secret, whispered through generations in the quiet of a kitchen or the hush of a graveyard? Some say the Priory is a code, a hidden message in history, a cipher wrapped in myth. Others insist it's a family name, a legacy of power and betrayal, buried under layers of time and silence. In every town, every village, there's a story that lingers, a name that's been forgotten, a truth that's been buried, and a silence that speaks louder than any explanation. Theories live on in the stories we tell, in the quiet corners of our minds, and in the places we never speak of. But sometimes, the past doesn't just wait, it watches. You see, the truth about the Priory of Sion remains a puzzle, not a mystery solved. Some say the records were lost, others whisper that they were hidden. But what if the real answer is still buried in the silence of the stones? Every time someone digs deeper, they find more questions, no answers, just more silence. It's like the place itself is holding its breath, waiting for someone to finally ask the wrong question. Perhaps the truth is not in the records, but in the people who lived there. The women who walked those halls, the men who whispered secrets in the dark. Some say their voices are still there, waiting to be heard. And so, the Priory of Sion remains a place of quiet sorrow and unspoken truth. A reminder that some stories are not meant to be finished, only remembered. You know, sometimes the scariest stories aren't the ones with ghosts, but the ones that make you question what really happened. We've traveled through history, through shadow, through the whispers of the past. Now let's let the silence settle in, just for a moment. So, as we turn the page, remember this: the past isn't gone, it's just waiting to be found. Now, let's go find the next story wherever it may lead. You've heard of the Priory of Sion, haven't you? A place where secrets were buried deeper than the earth itself. But what if I told you the silence there was too heavy, the air too still, for mere history? Nestled in the hills of France, this once grand monastery now stands as a ruin, its windows shattered, its doors ajar. It's said that even the wind won't go inside. Some say the monks who lived there were more than just religious, they were keepers of ancient knowledge, protectors of truths that the world wasn't ready to know. But then the silence changed. People began to vanish. No trace, no warning, just gone. And now, the air still carries the weight of their absence. You ever wonder what happens when a place holds too many secrets? When the walls remember the voices that once filled them and the silence that followed? You know, the Priory of Sion wasn't just a name on a map, it was a place of power, of secrets, of a very real, very old legacy. You've heard of the Knights Templar, but this was their shadow, their quiet rebellion. It started in the 12th century when a group of knights disillusioned with the church, tired of war, and desperate for something better, decided to build a new kind of order. Not one of violence, but of knowledge. They called themselves the Poor Knights of Christ in the Temple of Solomon. The church saw them as dangerous. Heresy, they called it. A threat to their power. So they sent the Inquisition to silence them. The priory was burned, its members scattered, and its secrets buried beneath layers of silence and fear. But the legacy didn't die. Some say the priory's knowledge survived in hidden libraries, in whispers passed down through generations. Others believe the spirits of those who died there still linger, guarding the truth from those who would misuse it. And now, as you sit here, you might be wondering, what if the Priory of Sion wasn't just a place, but a person? A soul who still walks the earth, waiting to be found, waiting to be remembered. You remember the first time you noticed the air had changed, like the world had paused just long enough for a ghost to take a breath. It started with the whispers in the library, so soft, so quiet, like the wind through the pages of an ancient tome. Then the cold, not the kind that comes from the window, but a deep, bone-chilling cold that settled in your chest and refused to leave. The walls began to hum, not with sound, but with a vibration that made your teeth ache and your bones feel like they were being rearranged. And then, the first time you saw the shadow move, just a flicker in the corner of your eye, but it was not your own. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You remember how the wind used to howl through those ancient stone corridors? It didn't just carry sound, it carried something else. A whisper, maybe, or a memory that refused to let go. One night, the wind changed. It stopped, and the silence was louder than any noise. It was the night that the last monk vanished, leaving only his rosary behind, half buried in the floorboards. No one knows where he went. Some say he is still here, somewhere in the depths of the priory, trapped between the living and the lost. Others say he's not lost at all, he's watching. And now, every time the wind stops, we listen. Because sometimes, silence is the only thing that speaks the truth. I've spoken to several people who claim to have seen the priory at night, and they all describe the same thing: a pale light flickering behind the old stone walls, like a candle in a storm. One woman told me she saw a figure in the courtyard, wearing a long black robe, standing in the exact center of the garden, never moving, never speaking. Another man said he heard laughter coming from inside the priory, but when he tried to find the source, it vanished like smoke in the wind. Some say the priory doesn't just haunt the living, it haunts the dreams. One woman said she dreamed of a woman with hollow eyes, whispering her name over and over. And then there are the ones who say they saw no one, but felt something like the air had turned cold, and the silence was too heavy for the world. We began our investigation with the old records, yellowed and brittle, like the skin of a woman who's seen too much. The first thing we found was a name, Eleanor Vane, who vanished in 1937, and no one could say where she went. The records didn't mention a body, just a last known address in the priory grounds, and a note, written in a shaky hand, that said, "I heard the voices in the stone." We followed the path, and the silence grew thicker, like the air just before a storm. The only sound was the wind, and sometimes it sounded like a whisper. Then we found the cellar door, rusted and sealed with a padlock that had not been touched in decades. It didn't budge, but the air around it was colder than the rest of the grounds. Inside, the walls were lined with old, wooden shelves, and the floor was covered in dust. But the dust didn't look like dust, it looked like something had been swept away, leaving behind a memory of a long-dead presence. And in the center of the room, on a low table, was a single, untouched glass of wine. The label had faded, but the wine was still warm, as if it had been poured moments ago. You know, the thing that's always bugged me is that no one ever explained how the monks managed to keep the priory so perfectly preserved for so long. It's like they just vanished and left the place untouched, like it was waiting for someone to come back. There's no sign of struggle, no broken glass, no overturned furniture. Just a silence so deep, it feels like the walls are holding their breath. And here's the kicker, no one ever found the actual records of the monks' disappearance. They just disappeared, and the priory was left behind, like a secret left in the hands of time. You ever wonder if they left on purpose, or if they were taken? And if they were taken, where did they go? That's the one question no one ever answers. But one thing's for sure, if they left with a story. And that story? It's still waiting to be told. You've heard the whispers, haven't you? That the Priory of Sion isn't just a ruin, it's a living thing, watching, waiting. Some say it's the last refuge of the old gods, others that it's a tomb for something that never died. Local elders tell of a time when the priory was a sanctuary, but then the people vanished and the place began to change. No one knows where they went, but they say the walls hum at night like a lullaby from a long-forgotten tongue. And then there are the modern-day theories like the priory is a secret society's hideout, or that it's a gateway to another dimension. But no one can prove anything. All they have are stories, and stories are the only thing that keeps the place from being forgotten. So when you walk through those gates, you're not just visiting a ruin, you're stepping into a mystery that's been waiting for centuries. And sometimes, the past doesn't like to let go. You know, some mysteries are like old friends who just won't let go. The Priory of Sion has been whispering its secrets for centuries, and still, no one has quite figured out what happened there. There are so many stories, some say it was a cult, others a secret society, and a few even claim it was a place where time itself broke down. But no one can agree on the truth. The real question isn't what happened there, but why it still haunts us. Why do we keep coming back to the same old stories, like we're hoping someone somewhere will finally answer the call? Maybe the answer isn't in the stones or the books, but in the silence between the lines. In the spaces where the story stops, where the truth has always been waiting, quiet, patient, and full of secrets. You know, sometimes the most haunted places aren't the ones you expect. A quiet room, and dusty window, the echo of a forgotten name, those are the ones that linger longest in the bones. And sometimes, the truth is just a whisper in the wind, like the Priory of Sion, where the silence is louder than the stories. And just like that, the next story begins. Are you ready to listen? Let's not be strangers. Let's be listeners. Let's be the ones who hear. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a story to tell and a haunted place to find. Stay with me. The next tale is waiting. You've heard of the caves, but have you ever felt their silence? Olith caves are more than just stone and water. They're a memory of a time when the world was wilder and the dark held secrets. Local legends say the caves were once a sanctuary for those who knew how to listen. But something changed, something in the dark, or perhaps out of it. The stories say the caves no longer welcome visitors. The caves are said to have a presence like a breath held too long. Some say they hear whispers in the stone. Others that the air feels heavier, as if the walls themselves are holding their breath. What happened here? No one knows for sure, but the caves have a way of remembering, and the silence is louder than any sound. As you step closer, you can feel it, the weight of the past pressing against the present. The caves are waiting. Are you ready to listen? You ever wonder how a place like Blith Caves got its start? Back in the 1800s, this was a booming town, a real hub of industry. You can almost picture its smoke rising from the mines, the clatter of pickaxes, the hum of life. The caves themselves were discovered by a group of miners in 1845, but they weren't just looking for gold. They were chasing something else entirely, a legend of a hidden chamber that held ancient secrets. But not everyone who entered came out. There were whispers of disappearances, of men who vanished without a trace. Some said the caves were cursed, others believed they were protecting something dangerous. The last known miner to enter the Crimson Chamber was a man named Elias Granger, who vanished in 1862. His journal was found years later, filled with frantic scribbles and warnings about a voice that called to him from the depths. To this day, no one knows what happened to Elias. Some say he was taken by the caves, others believe he found what he was looking for and paid the price. But one thing is certain, Blyth Caves was never just a place for mining. It was a place of mystery, and maybe, still, of danger. You remember the first time you noticed something was off. That odd silence, the way the air felt heavier, like the cave was holding its breath. Then came the whispers just at the edge of hearing, like someone was speaking in a language only the cave understood. The sound of running water grew louder, but when you looked, there was no stream. Just the echo of something ancient and restless. And then, the light flickered. Just once, like the cave itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. You turned away, heart pounding. Not because of fear, but because you knew something had changed. The cave was no longer just a place. It was a presence. You know, some places just hold secrets that won't let go. Blyth Caves didn't just lose a child, it lost a part of itself. The air here feels heavier, like the cave is holding its breath. The last time anyone saw little Elise, she was humming a tune as she walked deeper into the cave. The sound of her voice faded, and then silence. No echo, no sound, just stillness. Some say the cave remembers, that it keeps the memories of those who entered and that it doesn't let go. It's not a place you just visit, it's a place that visits you. Elise's disappearance isn't just a mystery, it's a whisper in the stone. A question that lingers unanswered in the silence that follows her last note. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dub smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You can't help but wonder, as you stand here, if the cave is just waiting for someone to ask the right question, or if it's waiting for someone to listen. Blyth Caves don't just haunt, they remember, and they wait, for the right person, at the right time, and for the right question. I spoke to an elderly woman who said she visited Blyth Caves decades ago, and she swore the walls still echoed with whispers. She said the air smelled like damp earth and old secrets. She described a cold draft that seemed to come from nowhere, like the cave itself was breathing. She said she heard a child's laughter once, but when she turned, there was no one there. A recent hiker said he heard a woman singing in the cave, a lullaby he didn't recognize. When he asked for directions, the song stopped and the silence felt heavier than before. Some say the caves remember, that they hold the voices of those who once wandered their depths lost or waiting. And sometimes they whisper back. We began our investigation with a simple question. What if the caves were never empty? The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and something else, something ancient. The first clue was a faint, rhythmic tapping like fingers on glass echoing through the cavern. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't the echo of our own steps. Then we found the symbols etched into the stone with a precision that suggested no natural formation. They were ancient, but not in the way you'd expect. They were asterisk, personal asterisk. One symbol matched a marking from a local legend, a mark left by a lost traveler who vanished decades ago. And it was the same one we'd seen in the old photographs of the cave's first explorers. We couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Not by anyone we could see, but by something that asterisk knew asterisk we were here. Something that had been waiting. The caves had a story to tell, and it wasn't one we were ready to hear. But we were already too deep to turn back. You see it now, don't you? That one little thing, that one little detail, that no one ever seems to want to talk about. The one thing that's always been there, but never explained. It's not the screams, not the cold, not the whispering walls, it's the thing that just doesn't belong. The thing that seems to defy time and reason, like it's waiting for someone to finally ask the wrong question. You wonder if it's a warning, or if it's a clue, or if it's just a place where the past has found a way to stay. And you wonder too, if you've ever been close enough to see it clearly. That one detail. The one thing that has never been explained. And maybe, just maybe, it's not meant to be explained at all. You've heard the whispers, haven't you? The ones that say Blyth Caves weren't just a place for treasure hunters, but for something far older, far more hungry. Some say the caves were built by a secret order of alchemists who tried to trap a spirit of the earth here. Others say it's a place where the veil between worlds is thinnest and the dead walk among the living. And then there are the stories of the last people who disappeared, 3 hikers in 1987 who never made it back. Some say they were taken by the caves themselves. Others say they were never there at all. The local historian says the caves are just a natural formation. But the older folks around here, those who remember the old ways, say the caves have a soul of their own, and they're not always friendly. So when you hear the wind howl through those caves at night, or feel the chill of something unseen, remember some stories aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to be remembered. And if you ever feel the pull of the caves, you might want to think twice. Because sometimes, the past doesn't stay buried. You know, sometimes the most haunting things aren't the ghosts but the questions left unanswered. What if the cave itself is still waiting for someone to listen? The last journal entry was left in 1952, and then silence. No bodies, no clues, just a deep, unrelenting stillness that has settled in the bones of the earth. You can visit the caves today, but you'll find no signs of the missing explorers, just echoes, and the feeling that someone or something is still watching from the dark. So, dear listener, what do you think? Did they fall into a hidden chamber? Or did they vanish because the cave chose to keep them? And if you're ever in the area, don't be surprised if you hear a whisper in the dark. It might just be the cave finally speaking. You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest echoes. What if the caves are just haunted, but remembering? A whisper, not a scream, can be the most terrifying sound. Have you ever wondered what it would sound like to hear the past speak to you? The caves may be empty now, but the echoes remain. What do you think they're waiting for? And just like that, the story fades but the mystery lingers. Until next time, dear listener, you've heard of places that feel like they've been holding their breath for decades. Well, this one, it's been holding its breath since 1829. Welcome to Eastern State Penitentiary, where the walls used to whisper secrets. And now just wait. It was supposed to be the model of modern punishment, solitary confinement, silence, and self-reform. But the silence, that was just the beginning. The real horror started when the prisoners stopped talking and the walls started listening. They say the echoes you hear aren't just echoes. Some say it's the sound of a man screaming for help. Others say it's the sound of a man who never stopped screaming. And some say it's just the sound of the walls remembering. This place has a way of making people disappear. Not in the sense of vanishing, but in the sense of being forgotten. Forgotten by the world, and sometimes by themselves. So, I ask you, what do you hear when the silence finally breaks? A whisper? A scream? Or maybe just the sound of the past refusing to stay buried? You know, the Eastern State Penitentiary didn't start as a place of horror, but as a bold experiment in the 1820s. It was meant to be a model for the future of justice, a place where silence was the law and punishment was supposed to be more about reform than revenge. The idea was simple, almost poetic: no walls, no bars, just solitary confinement and silence. The hope was that the silence would break the spirit, and the darkness would make them reflect on their crimes. But it was also a very expensive experiment, and the first prisoners were mostly men who couldn't afford a lawyer. The first prisoners were men like the infamous Bloody Billy and others who had been sentenced to death, but were held in solitary for years. They were fed through a small slot, and their only company was the sound of their own breathing. It was a place of both hope and despair. The architects, like John Penn, had big ideas about morality and order, but the reality was far less romantic, and the silence often turned into something far more sinister. And so, the prison became a place where the silence was louder than the screams. A place where the walls remembered every cry, every whisper, and every unspoken regret. A place where the past never truly left. You know how sometimes, even in the quietest places, there's a feeling that something just isn't right? Well, folks, the first signs that something was terribly wrong came in the form of a whisper, faint like a breath on your neck, but unmistakable. It started with the sounds: a rustle in the leaves that wasn't there, a creak in the floorboards when no one was walking. Some said it was the wind, others said it was the ghosts of the men who once lived there, trapped in their own silence. People started to notice the lights, not the kind that flicker or sputter, but lights that weren't there before. Some claimed they saw a glow in the cells, or a flicker behind the bars, like a soul trying to reach through. And then, the voices, not loud, not clear, but there. A whisper that followed you, a name that echoed in your mind, a reminder that this place was never truly empty. It was just waiting for someone to listen. You ever wonder what happens when a man is locked in a cell, and the world outside forgets about him? In 1842, a young man named John H. Jones was sent to Eastern State, and the guards left him alone in a cell with no furniture, no light, and no hope. They called it the silent scream, a punishment for the worst crimes. But John wasn't a murderer. He was a thief, and in that cell, with nothing but his thoughts, he was left to rot, literally. The guards never checked on him. They didn't have to. He was supposed to die of starvation or madness. But John survived, not by strength but by sheer will. And when he finally walked out of that prison, he was a changed man. He never spoke of what he went through, but the prison remembered. And now, when you walk those halls, you can hear it. A whisper, a sigh, a sound that doesn't belong to this world. John H. Jones is gone, but his story isn't. It's etched into the stone, in the silence, and in the air. A silent scream that still echoes through the halls of Eastern State. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Some say the air inside the walls is thick with silence, but others swear they can hear it, those faint, desperate cries echoing through the corridors, like a child's whimper lost in the dark. One visitor, a retired nurse, said she heard a woman's voice calling her name in the middle of the night only to find herself alone, with no one else in the cell block. The prison has a way of making you feel like you're not alone, like something unseen is watching, waiting, just beyond the reach of your flashlight. Some say the screams aren't just from the past, they're still here, trapped in the stone, waiting for someone to listen. We followed the whispers of the past through the crumbling corridors, and what we found was more than just echoes. It was a trail of strange, unexplained phenomena that made the hair on the back of our neck stand on end. There were things we couldn't explain, like the way the air would still and hold its breath just before a sound would come from nowhere, or the feeling of being watched when we were alone in the cell block. The walls were lined with old prison records, and among them, we found names that had been erased, as if the prison itself had tried to forget them. But the most unnerving thing was the way the temperature would drop in certain spots, like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then, we found the journal. It was written in a trembling hand, and the last entry was just a single line: "They're not gone. They're waiting." You ever notice how some places hold secrets better than others? The Eastern State Penitentiary isn't just a building, it's a graveyard of silence, and the one thing no one can explain is why the walls still whisper. They say the prisoners used to scream in their cells, but the guards were ordered never to acknowledge them. What if the screams never stopped? What if they just changed shape, became the walls themselves? There's a room, no one knows which one, that still has a faint, metallic smell. Like blood, but not quite. Like something old, something wrong, still clinging to the air. And the one thing we're left with? Not a ghost, not a spirit, but a question. What did they do in there? And why does the silence still feel like a scream? You've heard the tales of the cells, the walls, the whispers in the dark. But there's more to this place than just the ghosts of the condemned. Some say the prison still remembers the faces of those who were never meant to be forgotten. Local legends say the prison is still haunted by the voices of those who were never allowed to speak their final words. Some claim they can hear them in the wind, in the echo of footsteps that never quite fade. There are those who believe the prison holds the spirits of the people who tried to save the inmates, the guards, the doctors, the chaplains. They say they're still here, watching, waiting for the door to open. Some even whisper that the prison is a kind of mirror, that it reflects the darkest parts of the soul. If you come here with a secret, you might not leave the same person you arrived as. And then there are the ones who say the prison never really closed, that the walls are still alive, and the silence isn't just absence, it's a voice waiting to be heard. You've heard the whispers, but the truth, it's still locked away. No body, no confession, just a silence that screams louder than any cry. They say the walls remember, that the echoes of the past are still trapped in the concrete, waiting for someone to listen. Some say he was a victim of the system. Others say he was a killer who never faced justice. But no one knows for sure, not even the walls. And so, the prison sits in silence, a tomb for the unsolved. A place where the past refuses to die, and the future never comes. You can feel it, can't you? That hush that falls over the prison when the sun dips below the trees, like the walls themselves are holding their breath. Sometimes, the silence is louder than the screams. It's the kind of quiet that wraps around you like a woolen shawl on a cold night, thick and heavy with secrets. And when the lights go out, you might just hear it, a whisper, a sigh, a sound that doesn't belong to the world we know. So, dear listener, as you turn the page, remember this place. Not as a story, but as a memory, one that lingers, like the echo of a voice you can't quite place. You've heard of castles, mansions, and old houses, but have you ever heard of a place that's been called the Eye of the Moon? The Priory of Sion, nestled in the French countryside, is said to hold secrets older than time itself. This isn't just any old building, it's a place where history and mystery collide. Some say it was founded by a secret order of knights who protected the sacred knowledge of the world. But what really sets it apart is the rumors. People say the air inside feels heavy, like it's holding its breath, and that the echo of footsteps still lingers long after the person has left. Some claim to hear whispers in the wind, or feel eyes watching from the shadows. Others say the walls themselves seem to hum with a forgotten language, something ancient and powerful. The Priory of Sion is more than just a building, it's a place where the past refuses to stay buried, and where the echoes of the past are still waiting to be heard. You ever wonder how a place like the Priory of Sion could have started? It wasn't just a random gathering of monks, no. It was a quiet rebellion, a secret society formed in the shadow of the church, with a purpose as hidden as the monks themselves. The monks, you see, were not just religious men, they were scholars, keepers of knowledge that the church had tried to bury. They were the first to write down the ancient secrets of the world, the ones that the church feared most. They called themselves the Priory of Sion, a name that means the place of the sun. But in truth, they were the keepers of the sun's secrets, knowledge that had been passed down through the ages, hidden in plain sight. And so they wrote, they hid, they protected. But they also made enemies. The church saw them as heretics, and the world saw them as something more, something that could not be explained, and therefore must be destroyed. Their history is a tapestry woven with both light and shadow, and the echoes of that past still linger in the stones of the Priory. You can almost hear them whispering in the silence between the breaths. You remember how the air felt in that old library, thick with dust and the scent of old paper. The silence was so deep, it seemed to hum with something unseen. Then came the first whisper, so faint, you almost thought it was your own breath. But it wasn't. It was the sound of something moving through the stacks, like pages turning without a hand. She checked the catalog, the security cameras, even the locks. Nothing was touched. No one had entered the room, but the book was gone. And the air in the library had changed, like it had been holding its breath for too long. And that's when she started hearing it again, whispers, but this time, they weren't just in the air. They were in her mind. A voice, not her own, telling her to remember something she had forgotten. She didn't know it yet, but the book had been waiting for someone to listen. And now, it had found a listener. You remember the first time you heard the name Priory of Sion, didn't you? It was like a whisper in the dark, a name that didn't quite belong to this world. You thought it was just a story, a tale passed down through the generations. But then you started to wonder, what if it wasn't just a story at all? The disappearance happened in the winter of 1972. A young woman, just 22, vanished without a trace. Her name was Clara Voss, and she was the daughter of a respected historian. You think, how could someone just disappear? And yet, the town said nothing. No one searched. No one asked questions. They found her boots half buried in the snow and her scarf still tied around her neck. But no body, no clues, just a silence that stretched longer than any winter. The town sealed its doors, and the Priory of Sion became a place of whispered legends, a name that lingered like a ghost in the cold. You think, maybe she was taken. Maybe she wasn't just lost to the snow. Maybe the Priory still watches, and the echoes of her voice are still trapped in the stones. You wonder, if you were to go there now, would you hear her? Or would you just hear silence? I spoke with a woman who claimed to have heard a sound of weeping in the night, echoing from the old stone walls of the Priory. She said it was like a child crying, but no one was home. Another visitor swore she saw a flicker of movement in the chapel's stained glass, just a shadow, but it made her heart race. She said the glass looked almost alive, like it was watching her. There's a man who said the wind here carries voices, words in a language he doesn't know, but he feels in his bones. He says it's not the wind, but something else entirely. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Some say the Priory remembers, that it holds the echoes of the past, waiting for the right moment to let them out. And maybe, for some, it's not just a place, it's a prison. We followed the trail of whispers through the damp corridors of the Priory, where the past clung to the walls like mildew. Each step felt like a betrayal of silence, as if the stones themselves were holding their breath. The investigation led us to a hidden room beneath the chapel, its door sealed with a rusted iron lock. Inside, the air was colder than the outside, and the silence was louder than any sound. Among the pages, we found names that had been erased and dates that didn't match the records. It was as if the past had been deliberately rewritten, like a story too dangerous to tell. The deeper we dug, the more the walls seemed to close in. The Priory was not just haunted, it was guarding a secret, and it wasn't ready to let us go. You ever wonder what happens when a secret is buried so deep, even the truth forgets it exists? The Priory of Sion has a ghost, but it's not the ghost of a person. It's the ghost of a question. The archives were sealed for decades. No one knows who put the key in the wall, or why they left it there. You can't even be sure the key was ever meant to open anything. No one has ever found the hidden room. No one has ever found the person who sealed it. And no one has ever asked the right question. That's the one detail that has never been explained. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the Priory of Sion doesn't need answers. Maybe it just needs to be remembered. You've heard the stories, but let me tell you what the locals still whisper. Stories passed down like heirlooms, wrapped in lace and lacelessness. They say the Priory doesn't just haunt the land, it haunts the bloodlines. Some say the Priory's secrets are sealed in the bones of the earth, waiting for the right soul to break the spell. Others say it's not the Priory at all, but a spirit that's been waiting for someone to remember its name. There's even a theory that the Priory isn't haunted by ghosts, but by a curse, one that's still bleeding through the roots of the land, the blood of the ancestors, and the silence of the trees. And some say the best way to find the truth is to listen not to the stories, but to the silence between them. Because sometimes, the most terrifying things are the ones that never speak. And still, the questions linger like a half-remembered dream. Who was the last to walk these halls? What did they see that no one else could? Did they leave, or were they taken? We'll never know unless someone, somewhere, decides to listen. The Priory's silence is its own kind of scream, a whisper of the past that refuses to fade. We've searched every shadow, every crack in the stone, but the truth remains just out of reach, like a ghost you can't quite catch. So I ask you, dear listener, what will you do when the silence speaks? Will you turn away, or will you lean in, just a little closer, to hear what the Priory has to say? And remember, the stories don't end here. They only begin to unravel. Until next time, stay warm, stay curious, and never stop listening for the echoes. You've wandered through the whispers of the Priory of Sion, where shadows speak in forgotten tongues. But remember, the echoes of the past are never truly gone. Sometimes, the most haunting stories are the ones we carry with us long after the last candle has burned out. The past is not a place to visit, it's a place that visits you. Now, dear listener, let's not linger too long in the dark. The next story is waiting, and the fire is still warm. You've heard of places that whisper secrets to those who listen closely. This one is called the Priory of Sion. It sits in the French countryside, where the land seems to hold its breath. It's not just a ruin, it's a place where time feels heavy, and the air carries the scent of damp earth and old stone. Some say the silence here is too loud. Local stories say the Priory was once a place of learning, but something changed. A tragedy, a betrayal, or perhaps a curse. Now, it's a place where the past refuses to stay buried. Visitors report feeling watched, as if the walls are listening. Some say they hear voices, but no one can tell you what they're saying. It's a place that doesn't just haunted hollows. So, what do you think? Is it a place where the past has found a way to whisper again, or is it simply a ruin waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to step inside? You know, the Priory of Sion didn't start as a haunted place. It began as a refuge, a place of learning and spiritual exploration, built in the 12th century by a group of scholars and mystics who believed in the hidden truths of the world. The founders were called the Knights of the Sun, and they gathered in secret, passing down knowledge that would later be lost to time. They were scholars, alchemists, and philosophers bound by a single oath to protect the light, even if it meant hiding it. But as the years passed, the Priory became more than a place of learning. It became a sanctuary for those who had been cast out, heretics, outcasts, and those who dared to think differently. It was a place of refuge, but also of secrets. Some say the Priory's true purpose was to guard a sacred relic, a map to a hidden knowledge, or perhaps a person. But what was it, and who was meant to find it? That's the question that still lingers, like the wind through these old stones. And so the Priory of Sion was born not in fear, but in faith. But faith can be a fragile thing, and sometimes the light you protect can cast the darkest shadows. You remember the first time you noticed the air had changed. It was like the wind had forgotten its way home, and the trees were whispering secrets only the stones could understand. The birds stopped singing, not because they were gone, but because the silence had grown heavy, like the weight of a forgotten prayer. The villagers began to speak in hushed tones, eyes darting to the Priory when they thought no one was looking. They said the walls had begun to bleed in the night, though no one could say for sure what color it was. The first real sign came when the clock tower stopped at midnight. Not a malfunction, but a choice. The hands froze, and the chimes never rang again. You may have dismissed it as superstition, but you knew then that something had begun to shift in the bones of the place, and the silence was no longer just a pause, it was a warning. You see it now, the great stone archway, worn by time and the whispers of the wind. The Priory stands in silence, its walls thick with secrets. But something is missing, something vital. The last recorded event took place on the night of the winter solstice, when the moon hung low and the air was heavy with the scent of damp earth. The caretaker vanished, leaving only his lantern behind, still burning. He was found days later, not far from the Priory, in the shadow of the old oak tree. But his body was not what it seemed, nor was the message left behind a warning, a plea, or a promise. The message was written in his own hand, but it was not a confession. It was a request, a plea for help, a question that has haunted the Priory for decades. What did he see, and why did he disappear? The caretaker's disappearance remains unsolved, but the Priory has never been the same since. The wind still howls through its stones, and the lantern still burns, as if waiting for someone to return. I spoke to a woman named Alina, who claimed she saw a figure in the Priory gardens dressed in 15th century garb standing at the edge of the moat. She swore it turned to face her, then vanished like smoke. Another man, Henry, said he heard whispers in the chapel at night. He described a voice that wasn't his own, repeating, "The blood must flow." He stopped visiting after the third time. There's a retired nun, Sister Margaret, who insists the Priory is still alive. She says the stones remember, and the silence is full of voices. She is the only one who ever visits at night. Some say the Priory is a mirror of the soul. Others say it's a tomb for secrets. But one thing's certain, those who enter rarely leave the same. We followed the trail of whispers, sifting through old ledgers and brittle letters. The more we dug, the more the past seemed to whisper back, not in words but in shadows. One letter mentioned a hidden chamber beneath the cloisters. It spoke of a room where the light dies, and the ink had bled through in places, as if the writer had been writing in terror. The room was small, the air thick with a scent of old wood and something metallic, like blood or rust. The walls were lined with shelves of books, but none of them were labeled. And then we found it, a box, half buried in the floorboards, sealed with wax and marked with a symbol we'd never seen before. It looked older than the Priory itself. You know, the one thing that's always bugged me is why they never found the body. Not even a single bone. It's like the earth swallowed it whole, and the only thing left was a circle of ash and a whisper that never ends. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The priest said it was a miracle, but I've always thought it was a cover-up. You ever wonder what happens to a body when it disappears without a trace? What if it's not gone at all, but just waiting? The last thing anyone saw was the shovel, and the last thing anyone heard was that whisper. It's like the ground itself is holding its breath, waiting for the right moment to speak again. And here's the thing, no one ever asked the right questions. Maybe the real mystery isn't where the body went, but why no one wanted to find it in the first place. You've heard the tales, but some folks still whisper that the Priory's stones hum at midnight. They say the wind carries the voices of the lost, not just the wind. Some believe the Priory's old monks cursed it with their final breaths, and the place still remembers their rage. Others say it's just the earth remembering its own pain. There's even a local legend about a lost priest who vanished in the 1800s. Some say he was taken by the Priory itself, others that he simply became part of its story. And then there's the old saying, if you hear the bells ring twice, don't go near the Priory. The dead are never done with their business. Still, some say the Priory isn't haunted, it's waiting for someone to listen, to understand, to remember. You followed this story through the years, through the whispers and the silence, through the crumbling walls and the faded ledgers. But still, the question remains, what happened to the last keeper of the Priory of Sion? No one knows for sure. The last keeper vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a single, unfinished journal and a trail of unanswered questions that have led no one closer to the truth. The search for answers continues, though it's hard to say what exactly they're searching for. A ghost? A secret? Or simply the truth that has been buried for over a century? And so the Priory stands, a silent witness to the past, its walls still echoing with the footsteps of those who came before and those who may yet come. Perhaps the real mystery isn't what happened to the last keeper, but why we're still searching for answers long after the light has gone out. You know, sometimes the most haunting things are the ones that whisper, not scream, like the wind through the trees at dusk, or a name you've never heard but feel in your bones. The Priory of Sion may have left its mark on the land, but it's the silence that lingers longest. Silence has a way of holding secrets, don't you think? We walk through the echoes of the past, but sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we carry with us long after the last candle is blown out. So, as we leave the Priory behind, I'll leave you with this: some places don't need to be haunted, they just need to be remembered. And now, with that quiet thought, I'll take you to another place where the past still breathes. You've heard of the Grand Canyon, the Rocky Mountains, but have you ever wondered what secrets lie beneath the desert floor? Carlsbad Caverns, a natural wonder carved by time and water, hides more than just breathtaking formations, it hides whispers of the past. This isn't just a tourist spot, it's a place where the air feels heavier, the shadows longer, and the silence deeper. Some say the caverns have a soul, one that lingers in the stone like a memory that won't let go. There are stories, of course, whispers of footsteps in empty halls, of voices echoing from nowhere, of a child's laughter that never fades. Some say the caverns are haunted by a past that refuses to stay buried. But the truth, it's not the ghosts that make these caverns feel wrong. It's the silence. The way the air feels thick, like it's holding its breath. And the way, sometimes, you swear you can hear something just before the silence returns. You know, the Carlsbad Caverns weren't always a place of wonder. Back in the 1800s, they were just a cluster of limestone caves, pretty much forgotten by most folks. But then there came a group of explorers, curious and brave, who dared to step into the unknown. They weren't just adventurers, they were miners, scientists, and even a few locals who knew the land better than most. Together, they mapped the caves, named the formations, and brought the first whispers of Carlsbad's secrets into the light. Some say the caves held a secret that even the miners couldn't fully understand. A lost mine, perhaps, or a hidden passage that led to something they weren't meant to find. Whatever it was, it left its mark on those who ventured too deep. And so, the legend began not of a ghost, but of a place that held more than just stone and silence. A place where the past refused to stay buried, and the echoes of those who came before still linger in the dark. You know how sometimes, even in the quietest places, you hear a sound that doesn't belong? That's what happened here. The first time someone noticed something was off. It was a faint whisper, like wind through dry grass, but it wasn't the wind. It was coming from inside, echoing just long enough to make you wonder if you were imagining it. Then came the scent, something sweet and sharp, like a memory you can't place. It clung to the air, making your nose twitch and your skin prickle, even though you knew it wasn't real. It was then that the hiker turned back, not because he was afraid, but because he felt something watching something that didn't belong in that place, in that time, in that silence. You can't explain it. Not really. You just know that in that moment, the cave stopped being a place of wonder and became something else entirely. Something that had been waiting. You remember the whispers in the dark, don't you? The kind that don't sound like voices, but like something trying to reach through the stone. It was late, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and ancient rock. The group had been exploring for hours, chasing the sound of dripping water and the echo of unseen footsteps. It was then that the guide vanished, leaving only his pack and a single boot print in the dust. No one saw him leave, but the silence that followed was louder than any sound. The others froze, their breaths held in the still air, as if the cave itself had inhaled and held its breath. They searched for hours, calling his name, but the echoes never returned. The last thing heard was a low, guttural growl, like the cave itself was laughing at their fear. No body was ever found. The cave swallowed him whole, and the stories grew. Some say the tunnels are still waiting, the rocks still breathing, and the silence still listening. I've heard from a few hikers who swear they saw something move in the dark just before the trail disappeared. They say it was a figure, tall and pale, standing at the edge of the lava tube like it was waiting for someone. One man described the sound like a soft whisper echoing through the stone. He said it wasn't the wind, and it wasn't the cave, it was something else, something watching. The ranger said she didn't believe her at first, but then she showed him the photo. The man in the picture had been lost in the caves over 30 years ago, and his name was never found. It's strange, isn't it? How the caves remember things we forget. How they hold on to stories that time can't quite erase. And how sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. We followed the trail of whispers through the caverns, each step echoing like a heartbeat in the silence. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and something older, something forgotten. The investigators found something that shouldn't have been there, a faded map, its edges curled with time, marked with symbols and a single name, Alyssa. It was as if the past had been trying to tell us something. Then came the strange sounds, whispers in the dark, a faint melody that seemed to come from nowhere. It was as though the caverns were singing a lullaby to a ghost that had never left. And then, in the deepest chamber, we found the last journal entry. It was written in Alyssa's hand, and it spoke of something she could never escape, something that had taken root in the very bones of the earth. We left with more questions than answers, and the caverns seemed to know it. The silence that followed was not empty, it was waiting, like a story that hadn't finished yet. You know, the thing that's always bugged me about this whole story is the one detail that just never adds up. No one knows where the blood came from, and no one ever asks why it wasn't cleaned up. It's like the cave itself is holding its breath, waiting for someone to finally ask the question that no one has the guts to voice. You think about it, don't you? Why would a place so beautiful have such a dark secret? You ever think about how the world moves on, and places like this, they just wait. They don't forget, they don't forgive, they just remember. And sometimes they want to tell you a story. So the next time you're walking through a cave, or even just thinking about one, remember this. Some places don't just hold history, they hold secrets. And sometimes those secrets are still waiting for you. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You've heard the rumors, but let me tell you what the locals actually whisper. Some say the bloodstains are just paint, they're warnings. Others claim the red marks were made by a cave diver who vanished years ago, and the caves still remember his fear. There's even a local legend about a ghostly guy who leads lost hikers into the depths only to disappear with them. And then there are the tourists who swear they saw something move in the red light, something that never should have been there. So, what do you think? Is it blood? Or is it just the caves remembering how they've always been? You might think the Carlsbad Caverns are just a natural wonder, but some say they hold a secret that's never been solved. What if the bloodstains are more than just a legend? The last known hiker to enter that chamber vanished without a trace, leaving only their pack in a single, unmarked bottle. No one knows what happened or if they were ever found. The caves have their own stories, their own voices, and sometimes they whisper in a language only the lost can understand. So the question remains, did the caverns take one of their own? Or is this just a story we'll never be able to solve? You know, sometimes the scariest stories aren't the ones that end in a scream, but the ones that leave you wondering if the silence is louder than the truth. And sometimes the ghosts aren't in the caves, they're in the spaces between the rocks, waiting for you to remember to look up. But before we go, let me ask you, have you ever felt like the past was trying to reach you, even when you weren't listening? Now, I think I'll go light a candle and tell you the story of the woman who walked into the caves and never came out. You ever wonder what happens when a palace becomes more than just a home? The Palace of Versailles, that opulent jewel of France, now whispers secrets in the dark. It's not just marble and mirrors, it's memory and mystery. Built for kings, it's said to be haunted by the ghosts of those who lived there, princes, lovers, and even a few who vanished without a trace. The air still hums with the echoes of courtly intrigue. Some say the palace is alive with the presence of a spectral woman, glowing softly in the dark, her light a beacon for the lost and the curious. Others claim she's not a ghost, but a memory that won't let go. But what if the light is not a ghost, but a warning? The palace has a history of disappearances, of people who vanished in the night, leaving only their shadows behind. And some say they're still waiting to be found. So, what if you're standing in the place where light and shadow meet, where history and mystery collide? What if the palace is watching you and waiting for you to find out what it's hiding? You know, the Palace of Versailles wasn't always this grand. It started as a modest hunting lodge for a king who loved to chase deer. Louis Roman XIII built it in the 1620s, and it grew over decades like a tree with many branches. Then came Louis Roman XIV, the Sun King. He wanted to make Versailles the most beautiful place on earth. He spent years and millions of francs turning it into a palace fit for a god. But not everyone loved Versailles. Some called it a prison for the king, a place where power was trapped and the people suffered. Still, it became the heart of France, and its history is far from peaceful. And as the palace grew in splendor, so too did the whispers. People began to say that the walls held more than just marble and gold. They held secrets, and sometimes the echoes of those who once lived there. So, when the lights go out and the mirrors start to gleam, you might wonder, who is watching? And what is it that the palace remembers? You remember the way the light used to dance through those gilded halls, catching on the chandeliers and making the mirrors shimmer like liquid gold. But now, the light feels different, almost as if it's not coming from the sun at all. The servants began to whisper about the light that followed them through the corridors at night, too bright, too warm, too familiar. It didn't come from any lamp or candle, but it was there, just beyond the edge of sight. Then came the voices, not the kind you hear in the halls of a palace, but something deeper, echoing from the walls themselves, as if the stone had memories it wasn't supposed to have. The first time someone saw the figure, it was just a shimmer in the corner of their eye, a woman in a pale gown, her face obscured, her hands trailing along the walls like she was searching for something that wasn't there. And then the doors began to open on their own, the heavy wood groaning like a sigh, as if the palace itself was trying to tell a story it wasn't meant to share. You see it now, don't you? That moment when the lights flickered and the mirrors seemed to breathe. It was the night of the royal ball, and the chandeliers overhead were doing something they never had before. The music stopped, the dancers froze, and then silence. Not the kind of silence that comes after a song, but the kind that feels like it's been waiting for you to notice it. And then, the queen vanished. Not in a flash of light or a scream, but in a way that made the room hold its breath, as if she had never been there at all. The mirrors never showed her again, but they still shimmer, and every so often, in the hush of a quiet moment, it feels like she's still there watching. Widen. You've heard the tales of the palace's grandeur, but what about the whispers in the halls? Some say the lights flickered just before the ghost of a lost princess appears, her gown trailing behind her like a comet's tail. One woman claimed she saw a figure in the mirror, standing behind her, though no one was in the room. She turned, and the reflection was gone, just a cold draft and the sound of a child's laughter echoing through the marble. Another reported seeing a light in the window of the Hall of Mirrors. The light had followed her as she walked the length of the room. When she reached the end, the light vanished and so did the mirror. There are stories of a man who heard the palace weeping in the night, its marble walls weeping silver tears. He followed the sound and found a pool of light beneath the palace, where the past seems to linger in the water. And then there's the gardener who swore he saw the ghost of a child playing in the gardens, chasing fireflies that never moved. He ran, but the child never followed, just the laughter. The team arrived at Versailles with maps, thermometers, and a deep sense of anticipation. We were looking for something more than just a ghost. We were hunting for a truth that had been buried for centuries. As we walked through the corridors, the air grew colder, and the silence felt heavier than the stone walls around us. We could almost hear the echoes of a forgotten past. One of the researchers discovered a hidden compartment in an old desk filled with letters and journals that hinted at a secret love affair and a murder that had never been solved. But the most unsettling find was a sealed envelope with a name that hadn't been mentioned in any official records. We had uncovered something that had been deliberately erased from history. As we left the palace that night, the air was still, and the only sound was the whisper of the wind through the trees. We had answers, but we also had more questions than ever before. You know, the thing that's always bugged me about this case is that no one ever figured out how the light got there. It wasn't just a flicker, it was a full-blown glow, like someone had turned on a lamp in the middle of the night. They said it was a trick of the eyes, but even the best illusionists couldn't make that kind of light. It was too bright, too steady, and it didn't flicker like a candle or a gas lamp. The only people who saw it were the servants, and they all swore they didn't touch the light. It just appeared, like a ghost had stepped into the room and left a little glow behind. No one ever found the source, and no one ever asked the right questions. Maybe the light was a message, or maybe it was just the last thing a ghost ever wanted to leave behind. You've heard the tales of Marie Antoinette's ghost, but what about the ones they don't tell? Some say she's not the only one lingering in those marble halls. Local villagers whisper that the gardens still hum with the echoes of the royal family's last days. Some say they can hear the sound of a child's laughter in the fountains at dusk. There are theories, of course. Some say the palace was cursed by the blood of the French Revolution. Others believe the spirits are just the lingering echoes of love and loss. But here's the thing no one really knows. The palace still stands, and the stories keep changing, like the light in the chandeliers as the sun sets behind the trees. So when you walk those halls, you might not see a ghost, but you might feel something. And sometimes, that's the scariest part. You know, sometimes the most unsettling mysteries are the ones that end in a body or a grave. They're the ones that vanish into the far, leaving only whispers and unanswered questions behind. There's a story that's been passed down for decades about a young girl who disappeared without a trace, her last known location being the gardens of Versailles. No body, no clues, just a name and a silence that lingers. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dot smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Some say the girl was a royal servant, others claim she was a lost heir, but no one can say for sure. And that's what makes it so haunting, the fact that we can't even agree on what happened. You might wonder, is it the palace itself that's holding on to her memory, or is it the people who still search for her? Either way, the mystery remains, and it's not going anywhere. You walked through the marble halls of Versailles, where light and shadow dance with the past. But what if the true ghosts are the ones we've never seen? Sometimes, the most unsettling silence is the one that follows a story, like a whisper that fades before it can be heard. The palace remembers. It holds every story, every whisper, every breath that was never exhaled. So, when the lights go out and the silence grows thick, are you still listening? Stay with me, for the next story may not be as bright or as quiet as this one. You've heard of haunted places, but have you ever heard of a place that whispers secrets to the wind? The Blythe Caves, nestled in the misty hills of Vermont, are said to hold more than just stone and silence. Local legend says the caves were once a place of refuge during the Civil War, where a group of soldiers sought shelter from the elements and from something far more sinister. The tapes were said to capture the voices of those who had vanished in the cave's whispers, laughter, and the occasional cry that cut through the silence like a knife. And now, decades later, the caves are once again silent, but the air feels heavier, as if something is waiting for the right moment to speak again. You know, the Blythe Caves weren't always a place of whispers and shadows. They were once a bustling hub of Victorian scientific curiosity, where the air buzzed with the thrill of discovery. In 1883, a team of geologists and naturalists led by Dr. Elias Blythe came to study the unique mineral formations and ancient rock layers. They brought lanterns, notebooks, and a sense of wonder that would soon turn to dread. But as the days pass, the team began to notice strange occurrences. Equipment would go missing, voices echoed when no one was speaking, and the temperature would drop without warning. Dr. Elith, ever the rational man, dismissed these as mere tricks of the cave. But the deeper they went, the more the stone seemed to close in around them, and the walls began to speak in voices that no one could explain. And so, the Blith Caves became more than a scientific site. They became a place of obsession, fear, and a haunting that would outlive the man who first walked their halls. You remember how the air felt in the caves, thick and heavy, like it was holding its breath. The silence wasn't just quiet, it was waiting, like it knew something we didn't. The first time the tape flickered, it wasn't just static. It was like the air itself had shuddered, and for a moment, the walls seemed to breathe, the stones moving just slightly as if exhaling. You tried to laugh it off, of course. You told yourself it was the cave, the sound of your own breathing, the way the air felt like it had weight. But then the tape started repeating the same phrase over and over, like it was trying to tell you something. And that's when you realized the worst part wasn't the whispers. It was the way the tape never stopped. Not even when you tried to rewind it. It just kept going, like it had a mind of its own, and you were the only one who could hear it. You remember the whispers in the caves, how they carried the weight of something ancient and wrong. But what if the real horror wasn't in the echoes, it was in the silence that followed? One night, a group of hikers ventured deeper than they should have. They said they heard a voice, not from the walls, but from the dark, like it was speaking to them, not through them. The local sheriff said it was a cave-in, but the hikers had no gear, no food, and no reason to head into the caves alone. And the last call they made was to a friend who never got it. Now, when the wind howls through the caves at night, some say they can still hear the voice. Not a warning, not a call, just a whisper, come back. I still remember the first time I heard about the Blith Caves. It was from a woman named Mabel, who claimed she saw a flicker of light in the dark, like a candle being blown out. She said it wasn't just any light. It was a pale glow, almost like a ghostly face peering through the stone. And then the cave went quiet, as if holding its breath. There's also the story of the man who went in alone, just to prove he wasn't afraid. He never came out. His flashlight was found near the entrance, batteries still in, like he'd stopped to think. And then there's the most recent account, a teenage girl who claims she heard whispers in the cave, not from the walls, but from the air itself, as if someone was calling her name. These aren't just stories, they're echoes, and sometimes the echoes are louder than silence. The team arrived at the caves with their equipment, but the air was thick with something more than just damp stone. You could feel it in your bones, like the past was holding its breath. They recorded everything, but the tapes started playing on their own, like the caves were whispering secrets they weren't supposed to hear. Some of the entries spoke of voices in the dark, of a child's laughter echoing through the tunnels, and of a man who never came home. It was like the caves were remembering something the world had forgotten. The deeper they went, the more the air seemed to change. It wasn't just cold, it was heavy, like the weight of all the stories that had been left behind. By the time they left, the tapes had stopped playing, but the silence was louder than any sound. You wonder, did they really leave, or did they just become part of the caves again? You know, the one thing that's always bugged me about these tapes is the way they just stop. Like, they're right in the middle of a scream, and then nothing. No sound, no silence, just an end. The last few seconds are just static, like the machine had cut out of nowhere. It's not like the tape was damaged, it's pristine, just forgotten. Like someone didn't want the world to hear what came next. You ever wonder what the person who recorded these tapes was trying to say? What they were running from? And why they never got to finish their story? Maybe the answer's still in there, hidden in the silence. But the question is, are we brave enough to ask? You've heard the stories, but let me tell you what the locals whisper in the dark. They say the caves still remember the voices that once echoed through them. Some say the tapes weren't just recordings, they were warnings, left behind by someone who knew the caves would swallow them whole. Others believe the caves are a kind of mirror, reflecting back the worst of us. What if the tapes were never meant to be found? What if they were never meant to be heard? And then there are those who say the voices are still there waiting for someone to come close enough to hear them, waiting for someone to listen. You know, some mysteries don't just fade away, they cling to the edges of our understanding, like a shadow that won't leave the wall. And the Blith Caves? They've held onto this one for decades. Every year, new voices step into the story, but no one ever gets close to the truth. It's like the caves are whispering, you'll never know. We've combed through every grain of dust, every whisper of wind, but the mystery remains. It's not just about what happened, it's about why it still haunts us. And so the caves wait, holding their secrets like a mother with a child who won't let go. What will it take to finally let them go? You know, sometimes the scariest stories aren't the ones that end with a scream, but the ones that fade into silence. like the caves themselves. They hold their breath, waiting for someone to listen. I wonder what secrets still linger in those stone walls, what whispers of the past still cling to the damp air. Maybe they're just waiting for the right listener. But don't worry, we've got more tales where this one came from. Just don't let the caves get too close, they might not let you go. So, come back soon. There's always another story waiting, and another corner of the world that's just a little too quiet. You ever feel like the sea's got a memory? Like it remembers every lost soul that's ever slipped beneath the waves? That's the story of the SS Marine Mermaid. Built in the 1940s, this vessel was meant to carry cargo, but fate had other plans. It vanished in a storm, never seen again. Some say it's still out there, waiting. Locals tell tales of ghostly figures seen at night, of whispers in the wind, and of a haunting melody that drifts from the depths. Some say the ship's final voyage was cursed, and if you listen closely, you might hear it too, a soft, melancholic tune, like a lullaby for the lost. It's said to be the voice of the ship, calling for those who still sail its waters. So, what do you think? Was the Marine Mermaid a victim of the sea, or did it take a piece of the world with it? Let's dive deeper. You know, back in the 1940s, the SS Marine Mermaid wasn't just a ship, it was a piece of America's war effort. It carried soldiers, supplies, and a whole lot of hope across the Atlantic. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Built in 1942, it was one of the many Liberty ships that helped keep the Allies afloat during the war. But even ships like that had stories, and this one was about to get a whole lot darker. But the war was far from over for the Marine Mermaid. In 1945, it was tasked with a secret mission delivering something that could change the course of history. What exactly it was carrying remains a mystery, but the rumors say it wasn't just supplies, it was something far more dangerous, and something that would haunt the ship long after it sank. And that's where the story really begins. Not with the ship, but with the people who sailed on it, some of them never making it back to shore. You remember the first time you heard the ship's name whispered in the dark? It wasn't the usual kind of tale, you know. It was like someone had forgotten to tell you the whole story, and you were left with just the edges of it. It was the kind of whisper that clung to your skin like a spider's web, and you couldn't shake it. You thought it was just a sailor's ghost, but then you started hearing it in the silence between your thoughts, like it was waiting for you to remember. Then came the lights. Not the kind you see at night, but something else entirely soft, blue, and always just out of reach. It hovered over the water, like the ship was still trying to float, even after it had gone down. You started seeing the faces in the fog. Not just any faces, but ones you knew, people who had vanished without a trace. You tried to tell yourself it was your imagination, but the fog never seemed to care what you thought. And then, one night, you heard it. Not the ship's horn, but something deeper. A sound like a child's laughter, echoing through the hollow bones of the sea. You couldn't tell if it was a warning or a welcome, but you knew it was the first note of a terrible song. You remember the last time you heard a shipwreck story? It was about a luxury liner, a storm, and a few survivors. But this is different. This is a ship that vanished, and the sea never let it go. The ship was built in 1952, and it was supposed to be the pride of the Atlantic. But on a foggy November night, it disappeared without a sound. No distress calls, no wreckage, just silence. The captain's journal was found months later, floating in the harbor. It was full of strange entries, warnings about the sea, about a place it called the Drowned Heart, and a single phrase repeated over and over: "She's waiting." Some say the ship was cursed. Others say it was lured by the cries of a woman who drowned long ago, and the sea made her a guardian of the deep. But I've heard no one who has seen the mermaid return. And that's why we still tell this story, not just to scare you, but to remember the ones who vanished, and the sea, which never forgets. I remember the look on her face, like she'd seen a ghost. She said the mermaid never sank, it just disappeared. One of the sailors said he saw a shape in the fog, like a ship, but it had no light and no sound. Just silence. Another witness swore she heard the mermaid's bell ring in the night. Not the kind that rings on a ship, but the kind that rings in your bones. They never found the mermaid's bell, or the ship, or the bodies. Just a single, rusted anchor that washed up on shore years later, with no name on it. You ever wonder what happens to the stories we can't solve? Sometimes, they just sink deeper than the sea. We followed the trail of old logs and whispered rumors to the edge of the docks, where the sea hums like a lullaby and the air smells of salt and regret. The Marine Mermaid's ghost is said to linger where the tide retreats, waiting for the right moment to rise again. The crew of the salvage team was small, like a family of explorers, each carrying their own secrets and questions. Some had heard the stories before, others were just chasing a story, but all of them felt the weight of something ancient pressing against the waves. One of the crew, a retired fisherman, told us he'd seen the lights in the dark, like lanterns on the water, but they never came close. He said the mermaid had a voice, a low hum that sounded like the sea was singing a lullaby to the drowned. We found a logbook, sealed in a waterproof case, its pages yellowed and brittle. It told a story of a ship that vanished, of a captain who vanished, and of a cargo that was never meant to be found. The sea had claimed the mermaid, but the truth had never left. And then, in the quietest moment, we heard a sound like a voice, like a ship, like the sea remembering. It was the mermaid's song, and it was waiting for us to listen. You ever wonder what happens when a ship sinks, and no one ever finds the body of the last survivor? It's not just the ghost that haunts the waters, it's the silence that follows. The marine mermaid's final log was never recovered. Not a single page, not a single scrap of paper. Just nothing. As if the sea swallowed it whole, along with the truth. Some say the last officer on board was the one who wrote it. Others say the ship's captain, desperate to preserve his legacy, sealed the log and threw it overboard himself. But here's the real mystery. The log wasn't just lost. It was erased. As if the sea didn't just take it, she remembered it, and she wanted it gone. So the question isn't what happened to the marine mermaid. It's why the sea still remembers, and why she's still waiting for the truth to be told. You've heard the stories, but the locals still whisper about the mermaid's hidden cove. They say the sea doesn't forget the ones it took. Some say the crew's last message was a warning, not a distress call, that the ship never truly sank, just vanished into the deep. The town still marks the anniversary with a silent ceremony, a way to honor the lost and ask the sea to let them rest. And if you listen closely on the wind, some say you can still hear the mermaid's song calling, luring, and never letting go. Even now, decades later, the story of the SS Marine Mermaid refuses to be buried. No one has found the wreck, no one has confirmed the fate of those aboard. It lingers like a half-remembered dream, waiting for someone to wake it up. Some say the ocean is still holding its breath, waiting for the right moment to tell the truth. Others whisper that the ship's ghost still sails beneath the waves, carrying secrets that no one is brave enough to chase. So here's to the Marine Mermaid, and to the many stories that never end. May we always be curious, and may we never stop looking for the truth no matter how deep it lies. And if you ever find yourself near the coast, listening to the waves, you might just hear something calling back. You've heard the stories, felt the chill, but now I wonder what if the mermaid isn't just a ghost, but a warning. What if she's still out there, waiting for someone to listen? The ocean remembers. It holds secrets in its depths, and sometimes it whispers them through the tides. What do you think she's trying to tell us? Maybe the true mystery isn't where she went, but why she left. And maybe she never left at all. But before we go on, let me ask, what if the mermaid is just the beginning? What if the water's got more stories to tell, and you're already listening? Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a feeling the next tale is waiting just beyond the mist. You've heard of the Vatican, but have you ever imagined a place where secrets are kept so tightly, even the light can't reach them? That's the secret library, a place where the silence is louder than any scream. It's not just books here. It's history, it's power, and it's something that's been buried for centuries. Some say the walls themselves are alive with whispers of the past. Some say the library has a curse, not because it's evil, but because it holds truths that people aren't meant to know. And if you ever feel watched in here, you're not imagining it. This is a place where time stands still, and the past refuses to be forgotten. It's not just a library, it's a prison for the secrets of the world. You know, the Vatican's secret library didn't start as a library at all. It began as a kind of secret vault, a place where the church kept its most sacred and sensitive texts, some of which were not meant for the world to see. Back in the 15th century, when the church was still trying to figure out how to keep its most powerful knowledge from falling into the wrong hands, they started gathering books, letters, and even forbidden manuscripts from across the world. Over the centuries, it became a labyrinth of knowledge, some of it divine, some of it more curious. And in the quiet corners of this vast collection, stories began to whisper of things that should never have been written. The Vatican's secret library is more than just a library, it's a place where the past clings to the present, where secrets are stored not in books, but in the silence between the lines. You remember the first time you noticed something was off. It was just a faint smell of old parchment, like the air had held its breath for centuries. Then came the whispers. Not loud, not clear, but just enough to make your skin prickle. You turned, but there was no one there. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The ink began to fade, and the words would rearrange themselves when you blinked. You tried reading them again, and they'd be different. One night, you found your own name written in the margins, but it wasn't yours. You looked again, and it was still there in the same hand. And then, the cold. Not just the chill of the room, but a presence that pressed against your back, as if something had stepped out of the silence. You know, the Vatican's secret library isn't just a place for dusty tomes and ancient scripts, it's a vault of secrets, some so heavy they've left people vanished. One of them was a young librarian named Giorgio, who disappeared without a trace in the early 1970s. Giorgio had been working there for years, cataloging the forbidden texts. He was known for his quiet curiosity and his uncanny ability to find the most obscure manuscripts. But one night, he never came home. No note, no warning, just gone. They found his notebook later, but it was blank. No words, no clues, just a series of strange symbols and a single word scrawled in the corner, Vesper. Some say it was a warning, others say it was a message from something that didn't want to be found. And to this day, no one knows what happened to Giorgio. Some believe he was taken by the very secrets he sought. Others say he simply vanished into the labyrinth of the library, lost between the pages of history and the silence of the unseen. You wonder, dear listener, what would you do if you found yourself in the same place Giorgio was? Would you keep reading, or would you turn the page and leave the story unfinished? I've spoken to a handful of scholars who claim to have glimpsed something in the Vatican's oldest vaults, something that wasn't supposed to be there. They say it moves when no one's looking, and it's not made of stone. One woman described a face pale, featureless, and watching her from the pages of a manuscript. She said it vanished the moment she tried to take a photo. She's still haunted by the way it looked at her. Another researcher swore he heard a voice in the silence like a whisper from the past. He said it wasn't in any language he knew, but it felt like a warning. He left the library the next day, claiming he didn't want to be remembered. There's a story, too, of a monk who vanished in the 18th century. His journal was found years later, written in a feverish hand. He wrote of being followed by a shadow that moved before him, and of a voice that called his name in the dark. Some say the library is not just a place of knowledge, but a prison for secrets. And those who stay too long, well, they never seem to return the same. We followed the trail of whispers through the labyrinth of the Vatican's secret library, where the air was thick with the scent of ancient parchment and the weight of secrets. Every corner felt like a tomb waiting to be opened. The librarians were cautious, their eyes darting between us and the ancient tomes. One of them whispered, "Some books don't want to be read." In the deepest archives, we found a forgotten room where time seemed to stand still. The air was heavy with the scent of mildew and something older, something that had never been meant to be found. There, among the dust and silence, we found a book unlike any other, its cover worn, its pages brittle, yet its words still whispered in the silence between the lines. As we read, the air grew colder and the silence deeper. It was as if the book itself was watching us, waiting for us to understand the truth it had kept hidden for centuries. You know, the one thing that has never been explained is why the archives were sealed off in the first place. No official record, no official reason, just a locked door and a long silence. They say the Vatican had its own reasons, but no one's ever been allowed to ask the right questions. It's like the silence itself is guarding a secret that no one dares to speak aloud. You can hear the whispers in the silence, not just the echo of footsteps, but something more. A voice, low and urgent, calling from the dark. But no one ever listens. It's not the ghosts that haunt this place. It's the questions that no one wants to answer, and the silence that keeps them from ever being asked. So, what do you think? Was it a curse, a cover-up, or something even older than the Vatican itself? The silence is still there, waiting for someone to break it. Some say the whispers in the Vatican's secret library aren't just whined through ancient parchment, they're voices from the dead, pleading to be remembered. What if the church's deepest secrets are not just hidden, but cursed? Local monks claim the library is alive, a place where time folds in on itself. They say the books speak when no one's listening, and that the true horror is not what's written, but what's forgotten. Theories range from secret rituals to forbidden knowledge. Some say the library is a gateway, not to the divine, but to something older, something that remembers. And then there's the question no one dares ask: what if the library isn't haunted by the past, but by the future? What if the books are waiting for something to happen? There are some secrets that even the Vatican won't let out, and some mysteries that refuse to be solved, no matter how many years pass. Did you know that some of these books were never cataloged? Some were never found, and some, perhaps, were never meant to be found. The disappearances started in the 1970s, not of people, but of documents. Entire volumes vanished from the secret library. Some say it was a prank, others believe it was a cover-up, but no one knows what happened to them, and no one will say. There are whispers that the missing texts were never real, that they were just stories, or warnings, or prayers, that the library itself is a guardian of forbidden knowledge, and some books were never meant to be read. Some people say you can still hear them in the silence. And so, the mystery remains, not because it's unsolvable, but because the Vatican has chosen not to solve it. Or perhaps, they've chosen to let it linger, because some truths are too heavy to carry, and some histories are too dark to remember. You've journeyed through the shadows of the Vatican's hidden past, where whispers of the lost and the damned linger in the dust of ancient tomes. But sometimes, the quietest silence holds the most terrible truth. The archive is not just a place, it's a mirror. It reflects the secrets we bury, the sins we forget, and the ghosts we cannot outrun. What do you think you've seen in these pages? But before we go, let me ask you, what would you do if you found a secret that could change everything? Would you keep it or let it speak? The archive is always watching. The stories are never done. But I'll leave you with this. Sometimes, the greatest horror is not what you see, but what you feel in your bones. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have another tale to tell, one that may not be as quiet, but it's certainly not gentle. You've heard of the Priory of Sion, haven't you? A place that whispers secrets through time, like a forgotten lullaby. But what if those whispers aren't just stories? Nestled in the heart of the French countryside, this priory was once a sanctuary of knowledge, a hidden library for the enlightened. Now it's just a ruin, but the air around it feels watchful. Local legends say that the monks who lived there once guarded a sacred text, and that when they vanished, the priory itself seemed to weep. You can still hear it if you listen closely. It's not just the stories that linger here, it's the feeling. A sense that something is still waiting, still watching, still remembering, and that something isn't quite gone. So, what do you think? Is the priory just a ruin, or is it something more? Something that's still trying to tell us its story, in its own eerie way? You see it now, a crumbling stone wall, moss creeping up like veins, the Priory of Sion standing silent where it has stood for centuries, its secrets buried in the earth and in the hearts of those who once walked its halls. The priory was founded in the 12th century by a knight named Raymond de Burgos, a man both brilliant and ruthless who believed in the power of knowledge and the dark forces that guard it. The priory became a sanctuary for scholars and mystics, but also a fortress of secrets. It was here that the Order of the Holy Grail was said to have been formed, a group devoted to protecting ancient wisdom from those who would misuse it. But the priory was not just a place of learning. It was also a place of fear, where whispers of heresy and betrayal ran through the corridors like a slow, creeping poison. The priory's greatest secret was not its knowledge, but the truth it protected, a truth so dangerous that it was hidden in the bones of the earth and the souls of the dead. You know, the first time it happened, I thought it was just the wind, a faint, high-pitched whine, like a cat being chased, coming from the east wing. It was so soft, I almost dismissed it as a trick of the night. But then it came again, just before dusk. Louder this time, like a child's cry echoing through the stone. I looked up, and for a moment, I swear I saw a shadow move where there was none. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 Oz tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The caretaker said it was the old heating system. A rusted pipe, maybe, or the wind. But I saw the shadow, and I heard the scream. It wasn't just a sound, it was a warning. The next morning, the air was thick with the smell of rot and something sweet, like the inside of a grave. And the wind, it had changed. It wasn't just moving through the stones anymore, it was moving asterisk with asterisk them. I told myself it was just the season, but deep down, I knew something had stirred, and it wasn't going to let us go so easily. You remember the night the wind howled like a wounded beast, and the moon was swallowed by clouds. The air smelled of damp stone and something older than time. A young monk named Brother Edmund vanished that night, leaving only his robes and a single candle half burned on the altar. No one heard a sound. No one saw a shadow. The next morning, the monks found his prayer book open to a page with a single word written in his own hand, help, and then silence. No trace of him, no sound, only the echo of his fear. Years passed, but the priory never forgot. The wind still whispers his name, and the candle still burns, only now it's not the candle that's lit, but the memory of a boy who never grew up. I spoke with a woman who claims to have seen the priory in the early 70s, standing on the edge of the woods, watching the shadows twist like living things. She said the trees seemed to whisper secrets she couldn't understand. She told me the air was thick, like a woolen blanket, and the silence was louder than the sound of her own breathing. The shadows weren't just there, they were moving, just out of the corner of her eye. One man said he woke in the night, hearing a child's voice calling from the cloister. When you looked, There was no one there, just the sound of footsteps echoing through the stone halls. He ran, but the voice followed, and when he finally reached the gate, it was gone. He never spoke of it again, but the fear stayed with him, like a ghost that never leaves. Another witness described the Priory as a place where time bends. The stones feel warm to the touch, and the air smells like old parchment and something sweet and wrong. No one can say for sure what happened there, but the echoes remain. And if you listen closely, you might still hear the screams in the wind. We followed the trail of whispers to a crumbling archive, where the dust had settled like a secret. The librarian, a woman with silver hair and eyes like distant stars, smiled as if she'd known we'd come. She led us through corridors of silence, whispering that the Priory had once been a sanctuary for those who knew too much. The walls seemed to hum with the weight of forgotten names. Among the records, we found a ledger of disappearances, names, dates, and a single word, taken. The last entry was dated the day the Priory was sealed, and the ink had bled through the page. The librarian handed me a small, worn key. "It opens the door to the truth," she said, "but be warned, some secrets don't want to be found." We stood at the threshold, the air thick with the scent of old paper and something else, something that made the back of my neck prickle. The door, though sealed for decades, felt as if it had been waiting for us. You know, the thing that's haunted me most about the Priory of Sion isn't the ghosts or the secrets. It's the one detail that's never been explained. What happened to the woman who disappeared in the library? No one knows. No bodies. No clues. Just a locked room and a scream that never left. The locals say she was a librarian, a quiet soul who vanished one stormy night. They say she was the last one to leave the building, but the door was locked from the inside, and the only sound that remained was her voice echoing through the silence like a warning. Some say she was taken by the Priory's curse. Others say she found something she wasn't meant to see. And some say she's still there, waiting for someone to listen. But no one's ever gone back to find out. Not after what happened to the last two. So, what do you think? Was it the library that took her? Or was she the one who walked into the darkness willingly? And if she's still there, do you think she'd want to be found? Or is the silence the only answer she ever needed? You've heard the whispers, but have you ever asked yourself what the real story is? The Priory of Sion isn't just a place, it's a symbol, a mystery wrapped in centuries of silence and smoke. Some say the screams you hear are echoes of the past, of lovers betrayed, of secrets buried beneath the stone. Others believe the sound is a trick of the mind, a reflection of the soul's own unrest. Some say the whispers are the voices of the women who were never meant to be there. Others say they're the voices of the ones who stayed. And some say the sound is not a voice at all, it's a warning. There's no one left to ask. But maybe the answer is waiting in the silence, just beyond the edge of your hearing. And maybe it's waiting for you. Even now, decades later, the echoes of that night still linger in the air. No one knows exactly what happened, but the silence is louder than the truth. The last known witness, a gardener who swore he heard the screams, vanished without a trace. Some say he was taken. Others say he simply forgot to come back. The local priest, who once claimed to have seen a ghost, died in his sleep. The only thing he left behind was a note written in a trembling hand. They are not gone. They are waiting. We've searched every inch of this place, but the truth remains buried beneath layers of time, fear, and silence. And sometimes, the most terrifying thing is not knowing. So if you're ever in these parts, and you hear a whisper in the wind, or feel a chill that lingers longer than it should, don't look back. Not here. You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest secrets. The Priory of Sion isn't just a place, it's a whisper in the wind, a shadow in the corner of your eye. And when you think you've heard the last story, there's always one more shadow waiting just beyond the next flame. What if the real mystery isn't the ghost, but the silence that follows? Stay warm, stay curious, and remember, some stories don't end. They just wait for the right listener. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a feeling the next story is waiting just around the corner. You've heard of the Priory of Sion, haven't you? A place where whispers of the past refuse to die, and where the stones themselves seem to remember every secret ever buried beneath them. Nestled in the misty hills of France, it's more than just a ruin, it's a relic of a forgotten world, where the air feels heavier and the silence is full of stories waiting to be told. You've probably seen the photos, those ghostly figures in the corners of old paintings, the way the light seems to shift when no one's looking. It's all there, in the silence and the stones. But what if the real mystery isn't the ghosts? What if it's the truth that's been hidden for centuries and it's still waiting to be uncovered, right here, in the heart of the Priory? So, dear listener, what do you think? Is the Priory a place of wonder, or is it a warning? And if it's haunted, who or what is still waiting for us to listen? You see, The Priory of Sion wasn't just a place, it was a web of secrets, a refuge for those who dared to dream beyond the reach of kings and popes. It began in the 12th century, when a knight named Raymond de Pena, disillusioned with the church, gathered a group of like-minded souls in the shadow of the Pyrenees. They called themselves the Order of the White Brotherhood, a secret society sworn to protect ancient knowledge and preserve the wisdom of the ancients. Their mission was to safeguard the sacred truths that had been buried by time and tyranny. But even in those days, power was a dangerous thing. The church watched them closely, and whispers of heresy spread like wildfire. The order had to hide their work in the shadows, passing knowledge from one generation to the next, always one step ahead of those who sought to destroy them. And so the Priory became more than a place, it became a symbol of resistance, of hidden knowledge, of the quiet courage to preserve what the world would rather forget. It was a place where the line between history and myth began to blur. You remember the first time you noticed the air had changed, the way the wind seemed to hold its breath before the storm. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make your skin prickle, like the ghost of a memory you couldn't quite place. The clock in the library ticked slower than it should have. You checked your watch, then it again. It was like the house was trying to tell you something, but the words had been stolen by the silence. One evening, you heard it, a whisper, so faint it could have been the wind, but the wind had already left. You turned, and the room was empty, yet something in the air had shifted, like a curtain had been pulled back just enough to let the cold in. You began to wonder if the house was watching you, or if you were the one who had wandered too far into the wrong story. Sometimes, the most terrifying things are the ones that never speak. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You remember the first time you heard the tale of the Priory of Sion? That was the night the wind howled like a mourning widow, and the trees whispered secrets only the stones could keep. It was then that the shadows began to speak. It was said the Priory was built on the bones of a forgotten village, and every winter the snow would fall in perfect, unnatural patterns like hands reaching for the sky. The villagers called it the Singing Snow. One evening, the snow stopped, and Wicket, the voices, the last keeper of the Priory, a woman named Alara, vanished without a trace. Her door was found ajar, her candle still burning, and her journal left open on the table. They say she heard the voices in her sleep, that they led her to the heart of the Priory, where the walls were alive with memory. And when she didn't return, the snow began again, but this time, it fell only where she had walked. To this day, the snow falls in perfect spirals, and the wind carries a whisper, "Come back, Alara." The Priory still stands, but now, it waits for someone to listen. I've heard the stories from the lips of the living, and they speak of a place where the wind doesn't just whistle, it whispers. Some say it's the wind, others say it's the voices of the ones who never left. One woman, now in her 70s, claims she was there once just for a weekend. She said the house had a way of pulling you in, like it knew you better than you knew yourself. She told me about the scent of damp earth and the way the air would grow colder when you were alone. She said the house seemed to know when you were lying and would make you feel it in your bones. Another visitor, a young man in his early 20s, said he saw a woman in the hallway, but when he turned around, there was no one there. He described her as wearing a 19th century dress, with a pale face and eyes that followed him even when he looked away. He said she didn't speak, but her presence made him feel like he was being watched. He didn't stay long, and when he left, he swore he heard her laugh echo through the halls like she was saying goodbye. These stories don't just come from the mouths of the frightened. They come from the hearts of those who have felt something beyond the veil. And in the silence of the Priory, even the air feels like it's holding its breath. We followed the trail of whispers through the dust of time, and what we found was more than bones. We found a pattern, like a ghost tracing its own name in the dark. The deeper we dug, the more the past seemed to breathe. We found records that didn't match the story, and people who claimed to have seen things that weren't in the history books. One evening, we found a sealed box beneath the floorboards, untouched for decades. Inside was a diary, written in a trembling hand, filled with fears no one had ever spoken aloud. The diary didn't just tell a story, it told us we were already too late. It warned of something that had already come back, and it was waiting for us. We didn't leave that night. We didn't even blink. We just sat there, listening to the silence, and wondering if the silence was the thing that was waiting. You know, the thing that's always bugged me about the Priory is the one detail that never gets explained. No one ever talks about it. It's like a puzzle piece missing from the whole story. It's not the ghosts, not the architecture, not even the history. It's something smaller, something more personal. Like someone left a note behind and never came back to pick it up. It's like the Priory itself is holding its breath, waiting for someone to come back. But no one ever does. and no one ever talks about why that note was left behind. Maybe it's not about the past. Maybe it's about the future. Maybe the Priory is waiting for someone to finally answer the question no one ever asked. You know, some folks say the Priory of Sion was never a place of peace to begin with. They claim it was built on the bones of a much older, darker site where a pagan cult once worshipped the moon. What do you think, dear? Did the stones remember what they held before the monks arrived? Some locals swear the ground still hums with the echoes of ancient chants. They say the wind carries whispers in a language no one can understand, like the monks' prayers, but older, colder, and more alive. There's even a theory that the Priory's founder wasn't a man at all, but a woman, some say a sorceress who cursed the land to protect her secrets. And if you've ever seen the light flicker in the chapel at midnight, you might just believe it. Of course, some say the real curse isn't the land or the monks, it's the silence. That after the Priory fell, no one dared to speak of what happened. And now, even the wind won't carry the truth out of these hills. There are some mysteries that refuse to let go, like a shadow that clings to your heels no matter how fast you run. The Priory of Sion is one of them, and it's still whispering in the dark. No one knows exactly what happened there, but the silence is louder than any explanation. Some say it's a place where time forgot to move forward, and the past has no intention of letting go. We followed the trail of rumors and whispers, but the truth has always been a step ahead. Like the wind, it moves in places we can't see and speaks in voices we can't understand. Perhaps the real mystery isn't what happened, but why it keeps happening. Why the place still holds its breath, waiting for the next soul to wander too close. And so we sit here, on the edge of the unknown, listening for the next whisper. Because sometimes, the most haunting thing is not what you see, but what you feel in the silence. You know, sometimes the most haunted places aren't the ones you expect. The Priory of Sion, with its secrets and silence, reminds us that history has a way of whispering its truths to those who listen closely. As the wind picks up, it carries with it the faintest sound, like a voice just out of reach or a door creaking in a house long abandoned. It's the kind of sound that lingers in your bones. And when the silence returns, it's not empty. It's full of stories waiting to be told. But for now, let's let the echoes settle and the mystery remain. Until next time, I'll leave you with this. Some places don't just remember the past, they keep it alive. You ever heard of the SS Marine Mermaid? It's a ghost ship, folks, that vanished in 1942 off the coast of New Jersey. Some say it's still out there, drifting through the fog like a memory that won't fade. The ship was supposed to be carrying cargo, but no one knows what it really held. Some say it was a secret wartime shipment. Others say it was a ghost ship from the start, cursed by the sea itself. Folks in the area still tell stories about the ship's ghostly lights flickering at night, like a warning from the deep. Some say you can hear its mournful whistle echoing over the water, even when no ship is near. There's no official record of where it went, and no wreckage has ever been found. But the stories keep growing, and the mystery has only deepened over the years. And now, as we begin our journey, I wonder what if the Marine Mermaid is still out there, waiting for the right moment to show itself. You see, the SS Marine Mermaid wasn't just any old ship, it was a sleek, steam-powered marvel built in the 1930s, designed for speed and comfort. It sailed from New York to the Caribbean, carrying passengers who dreamed of warm beaches and tropical breezes. But the ship had a reputation, not for its speed, but for its captain, a man known for his strict rules and sharp tongue. He was a legend in the ports, feared by some and respected by others. But the journey began to unravel the day the captain made a fateful decision. He ordered the ship to take a shortcut through a stormy stretch of water, a route that no one had used in years. That choice would change everything. The storm came fast, and the ship wasn't built for that kind of weather. The crew was unprepared, and the passengers, many of whom had never been on a ship before, were in for a terrifying ride. The ship vanished without a trace. No distress calls, no wreckage, just a void in the ocean, and the stories that would follow. Some say the captain was the last one seen. Others say the ship was never meant to make that journey at all. You remember how the sea used to be calm, and the sky so clear, the way the sun would dip below and paint the waves gold. But then, one day, it was like the ocean itself had held its breath. The last time anyone saw the mermaid, she was sailing with a full crew, the ship steady, the sails taut, the sky clear as a bell. It was a peaceful, almost idyllic day. Then came the silence. No distress calls, no lifeboats, no signs of struggle. Just the ocean, wide and empty as if it had swallowed the ship whole. People started to wonder if the sea had taken the mermaid for a reason. Some said the ship had been cursed. Others said it had been lured by something far darker than a storm. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dove Death Smart Speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. And now, years later, the ocean still holds its breath, waiting, watching, for someone to listen. Before you go, if you enjoyed this, please give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And tell us in the comments what you'd like us to make next. We read every single one. Thank you so much for watching. Comment this emoji if you made it to the end.